Good afternoon, everybody. We are having a half-a-day offline seminar of handling pandemic in India, Voice of Youth. The title, I hope that explains more or less what should be the purpose of this deliberations. I'll just give you a 2-minute history of this Research Committee of Sociology of Childhood and Youth, which was established 2012 by Indian Sociological Society. For that, it was a latecomer because the mainstream sociology in India, like mainstream sociology in Europe and North America, did not recognize children or youth as adults, as people who will having mind, innovative mind, and also agency roles. So 1990s, we started, the European and Americans started their studies on childhood and youth. Although there was a study by Chicago School in 1930s in the United States of America, but that's in relation to criminality of the juvenile delinquent or youth, not really child or youth as subject. So they were also latecomer. And the latecomer for being, as sociologists say, that by 1990s, marriage was a failure in these countries. There was no trust, no dependence between the spouses. So they became dependent on the child because partners come and goes, as one famous sociologist said, but the child stays. So the children became the comfort level and the succor for the adult. So this is a very important term for a discipline like sociology, where adults dominated and mainstream people dominated, and it took a complete 180-degree turn to depend on child as center of the family, because divorces is now 1:1, remarriage also 2:1. We're talking 1990s, United States and Europe. So by that tradition, we had some writings in India from 70s, but then again, following Chicago School tradition, mostly on juvenile delinquent and the crime, or in India, unemployment of youth, which was tagged with many things. So the independent study, independent research on childhood and youth became a very latecomer and to crash the gates of mainstream sociology in India. A few of us tried that from 2000 onward in Indian Sociological Society, and we became successful at 2012 to establish this research committee. Since then, the research committee is growing and also connected with International Sociological Association, Sociology of Childhood and Youth. So in a way, I'm very, very happy because I fought a lot for this, that we have all our sociology students, 98% present here, including first semester, and we have also those who are going to present their papers. So finally, what we wanted in 2000 to 2012 that has generated certain interest in researches on children and youth. I will not say much more than this. I'll ask now the current convener of Research Committee of Sociology of Childhood and Youth, Professor Shubhashish Bandyopadhyay, who is in the Department of Humanities and Social Sciences in Indian Institute of Engineering, Science and Technology, Shibpur, which was the former B College. So I will now call Shubhashish to say a few words. Then our Vice Chancellor, Honorable Vice Chancellor, will actually give us the inaugural speech. Thank you very much.
Good afternoon, respected dignitaries, Professor Chattopadhyay, Professor Thakur, my teacher, Professor Bhadro, the paper presenters, my dear students, ladies and gentlemen. This particular session is a kind of relief for us because now, from a kind of prolonged online virtual mode, now we are standing in front of each other, interacting physically in physical mode. And fortunately, the pandemic provided us with a kind of window, and where I have seen personally, and still engaged with some of the activities, say the community kitchen in Jadavpur, the Refract magazine, also 3 universities in USA, Illinois, Indiana, and Purdue Northwest, where students' community converged together to help the immediate community when no state missionaries were available, really to mitigate the problems of the common people as they were suffering from the clutch of the pandemic. So this is a kind of exposure and experience for us also, that when the generic systems, the expectancy from the organizations and institutions are not there, absent, because we haven't negotiated such a worldwide mass-scale lockdown before that. The students' community emerged like phoenix, and they extended their valuable support to the immediate community as well as the most needy portions of the society who are not even being reached by the government and the state machineries. So, as we have learned for decades together that the springboard of the society is the youth, the palpability of the society is coming from the activities of the students. That was evidently portrayed and demonstrated when the pandemic in 2020-21 crippled our general civic life. So keeping all these things in mind, we thought about this, that there should be one exposure for the young sociologists who actually participated and negotiated in myriad forms the reality of the pandemic period. And let's see and hear from them what they have experienced. So that's all, basically, no big talk. We are here to basically to listen to you, your expose and your experience. So thank you very much.
Yes, I forgot one very important detail, that Shubhashish Bandyopadhyay was my first year student when I joined Calcutta University. So he was my first year student, and he still thinks I'm his teacher. That's nice to hear. Actually, there is another important characteristic, that is, all the presenters are very young. It would be really the voice of youth we will hear. So I'm also eagerly waiting. But now I have the task of inviting our Honorable Vice Chancellor, Professor Dr. Dhrubajyoti Chattopadhyay, who has always been supported. Whenever we say we want to do this, he immediately wrote one word, approved, or go ahead. And that comes within 5 minutes or so. I mean, it amazed me all the time that by the time I coming down after getting giving him the email, I came down from the 3rd floor to Vice Chancellor's room. He said, I have already approved it. I said, oh, I didn't get it, but it was approved. So thank you, sir, for being in such support with us. May I ask you to come and give us your valuable address.
A very good afternoon to everybody. We have with us Professor Bhadru over here and Professor Shubhashish Bandyopadhyay. But most importantly, we have the founder, vice chancellor, and the mentor of our university, Professor Ashok Ranjan Thakur, who always guides us that how the university should move. Now, today's seminar has already been mentioned by Professor Bhadru and Professor Bandyopadhyay, is that we are going to listen for the voice of the youth. So that part, if I just keep it a little bit out right now, so negotiating a pandemic in India. So I'm sure that all of you are right now experienced what we actually experienced for the last 2.5 years. And this is absolutely a different type of experience, and where we are continuously under the pressure of different types. First of all of a sudden we came to know that there will be no college, no university, no school, nothing. And we are having a lockdown throughout the country. We can't go outside. So that's an experience. We never had that before. And then after that, we started to experiencing certain things. When people are dying, the hospitals could not afford to take any more. And it is not only in our state, not only in our country, but throughout the world, the scenario is similar, that yes, the people needs medical care. And during that period of time, if you ask me, one of the very, very important experience for me was what I found in our neighborhood, where the youth, they came out and started contacting everybody that I am going to give this hospital number, who has got no oxygen, so how not we could get the oxygen cylinders and other things. So also certain letters that why don't you give us a certain amount of money with which we can go into purchase oxygen concentrator. And in that way I could find that all on a sudden this is absolutely very important turnaround I could see amongst the youth of at least the people in my surroundings who never bothered actually. I don't know why they all turned out that they started bothering, and I found that they're really feeling for it. And they're going out, they're making online meeting together, how to do this thing, how to do that, collecting all the hospital numbers and other things, contacting. And that is what actually a different type of experience, and I feel so good. We used to say that, oh my goodness, this generation, we are so wrongly actually pampered them, they don't feel for others. That's what our feeling, that we feel that we actually make them, that they are not very, they are not the character to feel for others. But this thing has been changed. So pandemic is actually, so when I said that negotiating a pandemic, that actually changed something in their mind. The people whom I interacted, whom I never found in this particular character, and they are in constant touch with a huge number of other people. And one thing I can tell you, a huge number of contacts I could see in our neighborhood, and the one you were mentioning about the Jadavpur canteen thing, but the Red Volunteers, they are almost every day contacting all the young age of between 18 to 25, and they're sending mails continuously to everybody and trying to say that yes, we have to come up. And the fantastic work they have done, I find that is really commendable one also. So this particular program was being organized by the psychology department, the Indian sociology department, the Indian Sociological Society, and the ISSRC 24 Society of Childhood and Youth. I really congratulate them for doing this, because this is something which changed our mindset about our new generation. And I'm sure that this is a very, very positive trend. Thank you. Namaskar.
I'm really, really thankful for our Vice Chancellor to say the last sentence that we will now see probably things in a novel way in the new normal scenario. And that's one of the tasks we have taken from this RC, that we'd like to explore this research and say something which would make sense. And for the first time in India in this area, because people don't work that much in terms of researches, work, projects on these day areas. Childhood is very neglected. Youth comes up in a sense that youth has some age, or when youth has some age over the parents and the families and kids, then we actually recognize them. So before that we say, সবাই যদি বাংলা জানে, তুই কি জানিস ছোট মানুষ? এই যে ছোট মানুষ কথাটা, এই কথাটা কিন্তু খুব অবজেকশনেবল কথা, এই বিষয়ে কোনো সন্দেহ নেই। Now I have the onerous task of calling one of my colleagues at 20 years at Calcutta, and here as first Vice Chancellor of Sister Nivedita University, and my mentor also. He is the mentor of Sister Nivedita University, and I think he's my mentor also, not here only, at Calcutta also. At Calcutta University, he was one of the few persons, along with our current Vice Chancellor, who actually did not consider us only women colleagues. They considered us colleagues, and Ashok Ranjan Thakur is a pioneer in that. So I have the great pleasure to call Ashok Ranjan Thakur, my beloved Ashok Da, to say something to us. Let me just say, after this, our technical sessions will start, and that will be conducted by our Secretary of RC 24, Sociology of Childhood and Youth, by Dr. Chandragori Datta.
Respected Vice Chancellor, Professor Bhodro, Professor Shubhashish, my dear colleagues and dear students. Indeed, it's a great honor to be able to confront this kind of engaged crowd in discussing a topic. My only problem is that sometimes I have been badly described as a Soviet film, a union which got dissolved in 1991, almost 30 years back. Professor Bhodro was speaking about the 1930s Chicago School of Thought. Just a little prior to that, there was this chap called Anton Makarenko, who wrote a book later on called Road to Life, and it was his pioneering work in the early days of the post-Civil War in then USSR, in making sure that the delinquent, abandoned, orphan children could get back to their life. It was a very controversial kind of stuff which was much debated even within Soviet Union. But even at a later stage, it was taken up as one of the exemplary way of how to educate these young people who were forced to stray away from the straight path of life. Pandemic for me has created partly a similar situation in India too. Going by the official record, I think it was 600,000 people who died, and a large majority of them as adult, with leaving behind a large number of orphan children. So in India too, it is great to see youth voice coming up, but what I would like to be reminded is that we have almost like 40 lakhs of such abandoned young orphan due to pandemic. For us who are in the business of dispensing education, the problem has been very well delineated by our Vice Chancellor, that it was a tough time in making sure that the business of education could continue. But what it has done to these young people, a large number of them, is that in a society already struggling to make sure that the bottom 20% of its population could survive in a tough situation, things have become more complicated for a large number of people. And we must look forward to them if we continue to think in terms of an inclusive society. Nonetheless, I'm just as eager as the Vice Chancellor, Professor Banerjee, and Professor Bhadro to listen to the young voices who will have something more positive to say about how to deal with these situations in future, so that we are better prepared the next time around. The only cautionary note I would say is that pandemics like COVID don't go away even like the Black Plague. Many of us may not know that the rhymes we are taught in the nursery refer to some of the Black Plague that afflicted Europe. Ring around the rosy, a pocket full of poesy, Achoo, achoo, I fall down, actually reflects the bubonic plague which laid down London and England very low at that time. Let us hope that this pandemic does not result in such a nursery rhyme 30 years hence. Thank you.
Good afternoon to all respected dignitaries, my professors, dear colleagues and students. Now we are moving on to our technical session, and the first session is entitled Negotiating a Pandemic, Crisis, Chance and Choice. The session will be chaired by Professor Piyali Shur, Professor, Department of Sociology, Jadavpur University, and she was the ex-convener of RC24, Sociology of Childhood and Youth, Indian Sociological Society. I would like to invite Professor Piyali Shur to dais. I would also like to invite the first two presenters of the first session, Deblina Chakraborty for Jabala Action Research and Shomili Pal Tiyasha Purohit on stage. Each presenter will be given 10 minutes, and I would like to request all of them to kindly stick to the time limit. Now I would like to hand over the mic to Professor Piyali Shur.
A very good afternoon to everyone. So we are starting our first technical session, and our first presenter is Debolina from Jabala. She'll be speaking on negotiating a pandemic in India, voice of the youth. they go, yeah, you have 10 minutes, huh? And I'll do like this. And just I'll give
I'll try to make it brief. Definitely.
just a technical to understand. Yeah, of course.
There is another microphone there also.
And we'll be taking the questions after 8 presentations are over. Okay.
Thank you so much, Piyali ma'am. Thank you, University, Sister Nivedita University, for giving us this opportunity. Global Action Research Organization. Thank you, Pula Bathru ma'am, especially for inviting us in this program. To begin with, just a line about Jawala, because I think this is the only NGO and the only organization who are present here to say about this pandemic situation, and we will be sharing our experiences, our work based on this topic. So to be in a nutshell, we have started our organization in 1992 and we are working with the prostitutes of Bowbazar area. Basically, our motto is to help the second generation of prostitution to come out from that filthy path and to make them help them to come in a mainstream, for coaching them, for giving them education and to help them for their livelihood. This is a very in a nutshell, but I won't go very far about Jawala today. I will definitely discuss about the experience and pandemic, what we had experienced in these 2 years. So, in this class divided society basically, so in a one line only we can say that I have also mentioned in my abstract that when India was busy in doing work from home, Bharat work from home. So the catch line which I got in this social media basically says a lot. Like us class of people in this society, seriously, who are employed, we were so much busy in doing work from home. But a massive section of people who are the downtrodden, who are the lower classes of our country, they were busy walking down to their home. And as we know about the migrant laborers, we have heard about them, we have seen in the media how they have moved to their home by walking kilometers, by 200, 300 kilometers, and many of them have died. So, going to the Jillas, to the district where we have been working, so I want to give you a picture of a contrast basically, that during pandemic, there was a announcement from various media. The pandemic is actually in one way very good because it is bringing all the family members together. It is a time when people are getting time with the family members and all, which is true for one class. Again, if I am saying something about the another class, if we go to the slum, if we go to the villages, then they will find there are small rooms, maybe by 5 feet by 5 feet, maybe the size of our bathroom they were dwelling in basically, and there 5 to 6 members actually dwells when the fathers and the brothers go to the work in the morning and come back at night. But during pandemic, as because they are not allowed to go out, so all the family members had to be bunched together in that small cage. And now the adolescents specifically had no privacy. Seriously, some girls from adolescent from Kolabagan, I think you must be knowing the Novena Cinema Hall in the south. Beside that, there is a slum called Kolabagan. The girls used to complain us, Madam, Didi, where we will change our clothes? Our dadas are here, our brothers are here, and we don't have space. What shall we do? And you know what? Father, रोज माয়ের সাথে বাবার ঝগড়া হচ্ছে. Everyone is staying at home and there is an increase of domestic violence, and we have surveyed it also in the pandemic. What are the changes is actually going on in the slums and the villages. We are seeing that the increase of child marriage, increase of possibility of trafficking, and the increase of domestic violence specifically. And in this boat, when there is an increase of child marriage, there is a change in the form also. Like before, what we used to do, we used to give information to the video, to the information to intervene in the child marriage. But now what they're doing, the child, the adolescent, she herself want to get married. She want to get out of that house. She don't want to stay in that house, in that environment. She is ready to go out with her boyfriend. She just elope and she is ready to child marriage. So the issues which we were addressing before 3 years is not the same after the pandemic. That's what I specifically wanted to mention. So we need to take some special care. First of all, we need to understand the situation and take some serious measure. So in regard of serious measure, the youth of the district have taken an initiative to build a community center for education. Because at that time the schools and colleges were closed, there was a closure of the educational institution, and this closure of the educational institution not only make the children vulnerable in the case of literacy, but also the children were losing their safe space. School is not some place where you come to study. School is something somewhere where children get to interact with each other. It's a safe space. They enjoy themselves. So the closure of school means a lot for the adolescents. So the youth of the community took the initiative, and they talking to the panchayat, interacting with the clubs, the local clubs, they made that community center for education, where they themselves are teaching the children who are not going to school, who are not allowed to go to the school. Now by this, we are also engaging the youth in one hand for employment, as they are getting a very small amount of remuneration as a teacher, and also we are trying to help the adolescent girls and boys to not become a dropout. Secondly, initiation for a digital learning. Now, suddenly from offline to online, this has become a serious problem for most of us, including our teachers and everyone. So for the students, it is another thing for which they want to get rid of the study, because they don't have cell phone. Till 2020, we taught the students not to use mobile. And from 2020 onwards, we are saying them, we are compelling them to hold the mobile and do the learning, digital learning. So this contrast is seriously not accepted for the children, and it is affecting their psychological mind also. And instead of learning, they are much more attracted to the pornography. They are much more attracted to various crimes, including the cybercrime. As we know, very recently there happened the Baguyati case. I think we all know how the two teens, the two male, have been strangled to death by their own neighbors, and the accused is of 24 years of age. So this is something. Now you will say this is not something new, Didi. This happened. This is happening for 2 years. So this is something which we call normalization of crime. The thing is getting very normal in crime. If someone is snatching your purse, the next day, so okay, pandemic has happened, everybody is unemployment, this will happen, this will increase. But it is not getting into our mind that this normalization of crime will go to a height of the level when not only children, every one of us are in a vulnerable stage. So we need to come out of this. We need employment. We need to increase the employment. Maybe we have to change the form, as we have to go to the administration, to the educational department to talk to them that maybe there are no employment in the government job, but we need to create it. We need to create it, because as Jawala is doing, it is trying to help the youth, engaging the youth in educational center as a teacher. It is engaging the youth, especially the women, in digital learning, who are helping the adolescents of the tea gardens of Alipurduar and Jalpaiguri to know how to deal with these online classes, to all these things. Likewise, we need to have our focus on the employment part. I think it's a very urgent situation of this time. So, Jawala's participation in this seminar, and especially
we need to do this interact with the students, especially with the teachers, because we need to share our views, take our suggestions also, how to get out the situation. Because today you are a student, tomorrow you go out to the society and you will find a completely society which is very different from your classroom. So there you have to deal with it, as we have all have done. And with the teachers, with your valuable experience, we need to address the situation and really help the adolescent to come out of the situation. Thank you so much.
No, it's within time. Thank you for making visible things that remain invisible actually. So I'll add a line. I was constantly said that why are lower class people on the streets during the lockdown? We stay within our homes. Why can't they stay within their homes? And I couldn't make them understand. They were oblivious to the fact that in one cramped room, 15 of you cannot stay for long. They have to come out and breathe in air. One of my known persons told me যে দিদি কি করে থাকবো একটা ঘরে 10-15 জন মিলে একটু, আর আমরা যাই বেরোচ্ছি এবং পুলিশ এসে আমাদের মেরে ঘরে ঢুকিয়ে দিচ্ছে. So this was the situation actually. Thank you. So our next speaker is speakers are Shomili Paul and Tiyasha Purohit. The title of their presentation is P for Pandemic, P for Politics. Please introduce yourself.
There is one microphone. But are you going
We can share. Yes.
You can take this also.
No, actually they have to share. They cannot talk at a time.
Good afternoon everyone. Shomili Paul and I am Tiyasha Purohit. We are presenting our very first paper. We just graduated from Jadavpur University and we'll continue with our post-graduation in sociology. And thank you SNU for giving us such a beautiful opportunity. P for pandemic, P for politics. Popular discourses on youth have been conceived upon the interests and ideals of adults in lieu of focusing on the intricacies and ordeals of the youth. Industrial Revolution promoted the predominant conviction of the necessity to monitor the youth by adults, aiming towards the stoppage of exploitative victimization for economic purposes. On one hand, putting the youth on a pedestal by holding them as the bannermen of future, and on the other hand, hindering their growth by pillaring their opinions, especially political, is typical of the 21st century. Definitions and cohort of the youth across histories have been a contested issue, with a rising attitude towards identifying and reinforcing causes encompassing the youth. Protection of youth against economic exploitation prevailing in the history have now transformed into social policies deliberately enhancing the impoverishment of the youth. Further, youth in need of financial assistance are only aided if deemed profitable. Recognizing youth in a gender term as assets and liabilities has been long established. The continuum of adults and youth additionally enjoys a status quo when the latter is scrutinized as incompetent. The subsequent vigilance strips them of their political autonomy. This deprivation is fortified by educational institutions claiming themselves as apolitical and free of any political disruption. Propelling and endorsing the youth's association solely with academics brings their growth to a stagnant. Unhealthy sense of dissent permeating from the authoritarian government to the youth ultimately leads to their shriveling. Thus, there intensifies a necessity of not only political awareness but also political participation comprising the youth. Student union present in colleges and universities proliferate engagement among the youth. It establishes a manifested function of political consciousness, similarly being at par with latent function of inducing a sense of responsibility and empowerment as propounded by functionalist Robert Merton. The disruptive pandemic exacerbated the existing complex of politics and youth. Confinement and immobility and learning loss aggravated the vulnerability of the young. Concern about psychological distress, unemployment, turbulent familial relations rose to zenith, ultimately limiting the trajectory of youth politics. Though educational organizations, student council and unions struggled to secure flexibility and continuity, the digital divide remained unaltered. With online classes and assessments being the only substitute for physical classes and exams, the alternative was highly negative, sometimes labeling the students opting such measures to the extent of invalidating their degrees and denying them jobs. The student bodies, acting as mediators in some cases, were successful in propagating the student voice of the young, but evidently failed a lot of times. Student politics reshaped its activities during the COVID-19 pandemic, using the social media to avoid narrowing down the initiatives. Online agitation to some extent compensated for the inability to interrogate the present liberal economy, bringing forth non-conventional means to ensure better involvement. Jadavpur and its politics. While the campus is forever adorned with red color posters, it is not unusual to point out the infiltration of green and orange, the colors often associated with oppression and authoritarianism. Both the non-primary colors would not have been cited a few years ago, but their presence in the campus premise gives us an insight into growing percolation of ideologues that differ from the Red Bastion. Jadavpur University, having maintained its political dynamism, have been subjected to abhorrence by guardians who tend to shelter their children from the shackles of dirty politics and beguiles them into institutions that steer clear of politics that fit their definition. Often, these apolitical institutions harbor misogynist and stereotypical codes of conduct which seem to be more tolerable than the free will of a student in an establishment like Jadavpur University. Along with modest research output from all the departments of the university, this abode of higher learning stands tall according to the government parameters, academically placing itself on the higher ranks. Thus, what could have been a source of ridicule of the liberal institution gets defeated by the academic vigor. As the campus witnesses a new batch of students every year, the walls still reek of the cacophonous chants of Hope Colorado, reminding us of the ramifications that a fraudulent step can make. Hope Colorado has left an indelible mark in the history of student politics, setting a precedent for student unions to look up to. While 2014 might need you to turn the pages of history, the 2019 political clash involving the Union Minister Babul Supriyo fortified the potential of student unions, making a robust defense against the formation of student councils. Resentment towards the council. Apolitical educational institutes during the COVID-19 pandemic have proved to be tardy in responding to the pleas of the students, where the student council can also be held responsible. Talking to a student of reputed missionary college in Kolkata, it has come to our notice that their students' council had made no efforts to bridge the gap that had sprung up during the digitization of education. The students had been made to sit for back-to-back semester examinations with only 10 days between them, without any consideration for those affected by pandemic. This extreme impulsive decision, even though criticized by students, a formal protest couldn't be launched against the said authority because it could have been met with suspension. A social media post underlying the administrative failure of the college during the pandemic was asked to be taken down, for it might bring ill repute to the college. In contrast, Jadavpur University Arts Faculty Students Union, or AFSU, had taken enough measures to ensure that students' well-being stay in foreground, considering opinions of the present pupils and presenting them to the concerned authority had a solemn effect and grievances were addressed. Provision for supplementary exams were announced for students affected with COVID-19. Thus, this stark difference between the two institutions has emboldened the faith of students in union elected by them. While the higher educational institutions had resumed with offline classes in February, the state government is yet to conduct the election of the students' union. Elections have been withheld for about 2 years, and as informed, it had been difficult to manage the union, as students holding position in the union might be graduating, but they would still have the responsibility of the union on their shoulders. The possibility of managing the digital
divide better if elections were held on time seemed obvious in an interview with an activist who owes their allegiance with the Students' Federation of India, the student wing of the CPIM.
Slacking away or being notable. Protesting students establishing the demands were a constant sight on the campus premise pre-COVID. With the onset of lockdown, the protests were delimited to online spaces. Online activism is often referred to as slacktivism, and while it may be true that physical display of solidarity shows prominence, an online activist might not even be a real person. Moreover, do not miss the feeling of being in an in-group. The students might engage in rebellion, who in reality, their opinions might have been deferred. It needs to be established how in India, around 5,300 own a smartphone, while 87 out of 100 own a smartphone in the USA. The pandemic pushed people to be on their own to minimize physical contact and pushed people to the brink of individualism so that the students also developed an apathy to their own campus politics. This indifference hit activists when they found students leaving their seats during campaigning. This could also be, worsening mental health could also be the reason of this. The students of Jadavpur University were made aware of the digital divide, but they chose to put on their masks first, as is always advised when boarding an airplane. The union did otherwise. They did a prompt survey to find out who needed smartphones, and such provisions were made such provisions were not made in the missionary college that had been spoken about. Lifting the veil. Explaining in a way government would approve of, the union can be explained as a group of actors camouflaging their identities when facing the front stage. A literal mask helped in the prevention of viral disease, and the metaphorical one also concealed the negative parts. The online presence was the mask facilitating the spread of favorable attitudes only. The continued online interaction was rehearsed and paved way for no spontaneous lips in character, which seemingly hindered the physical understanding of a person, leading students to believe in an idealized version that was put forward. Furthermore, the physical distancing did not allow dissenters to talk to potential members of the idealized group, lessening the chances of critical reasoning. The mask did not only prove favorable for the ruling political group, but significant inroads have been made by a rival group that employed several means to garner support. The rival group is also the student wing of the ruling party of the state government, who were initially against the elections pre-pandemic. While they have conveniently brushed this contradiction aside, new people might not even be aware of this. Keeping the students busy with cultural activities and celebration of religious festivals like Holi on campus, this group that was on thin ice in 2019 has certainly managed to get noteworthy support from students who are encouraged and introduced to critical thinking as soon as they step into college and not succumb to the very facade of illusionary politics of appeasement. At the same time, very pressing, persuasive, and put forth the demand strongly. A professor was seen quoting this, who has outlived a time in college, unequivocally voiced for the sustenance of a students' union. He believed that JU, owing to its nature, should opt for a student union.
Very sorry, your time is over. If you can sum up in your own words.
Only a paragraph left. Mapping the intricacies of AFSU, Kolkata with the paper sufficiently highlighted the minute transposition that reeked of democratic failure, with even lower mark scored in the subject of student participation in politics. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next presentation is by Joyita Basu. She'll be speaking on virtual intimacy among the teenagers, calls for a crisis for the next generation, a sociological study. This is a word message to the participants. It will be better if you don't read out. Reading out makes things a bit uninteresting. So if you can say it in your own words, you refer to what you have written, but it will be better if you don't read it out.
Good afternoon, everyone. Virtual intimacy amongst the teenagers, call for the crisis for the next generation, a sociological study. This is my topic, and I'm a faculty in Maharani Kashishuri College, Kolkata. I would firstly say that this is an experience common to all. That is, the COVID-19 has actually altered our kind of social relationships that we have always celebrated, enjoyed, the way we have learned, the way we have socialized, the way we have done our things with our extended lengthy timings at home, with our schools and colleges shut down for a long period of time. Internet has become an essential part to everybody's life, and for the students, we have to say that this was something which has become undeniable. For making them study, we are in a situation that we cannot say no to the students, which we could say actually 3 years back. Virtual reality, which is something very importantly I have focused in this paper. It is a new technology which has a potential in altering the the human relationship, the human social system, because it is extremely immersive, engrossing, and it is an interactive experience. For my objectives, I would focus on the problems that the parents are facing with their children studying in reputed English medium schools of Kolkata. Secondly, I try to locate the risk which the students entail through the interactions with the strangers that they can get involved with, and if the parents feel tensed about coping up with the virtual competitors. My methodology has been purposive sampling, which I have used here. 20 parents were interviewed in depth, and their children are between the age 15 and 18 years of age. I have studied several materials on this before I could actually make my study, and I found out that there is a behavioral change which most of the social analysts and the psychologists who have actually focused on. And like several doctors have spoken here about the continuous addiction that has developed amongst the students, and the kind of the sexually implicit videos and the pornography that they are sharing over the WhatsApp. And this is something which is kept secret in between the parents, because they are unable to have an access to what these children are actually doing with their mobile phones. And the doctor said that porn addiction is something which has actually developed in the last 3 years, and I have found doctors who have said that in the last 4 years, like in a month, 4 of such cases I am having, and I made a study on that also. And 30% of the data says that parents are lower tech readiness is there. That is, people, the elders are dependent on others and even on their children for to know about the operation of the device, because parents in most of the cases are unable to actually handle it. And the screen timings, the screen use has actually increased from 3.5 hours to 5.12 hours in the last 3 years. It was a study which was made over India, and in New Delhi specifically, 5 hours of screen time has actually increased for the children between 5 to 15 years of age as well. And certainly if you talk about the physical fitness, then certainly there are issues with ophthalmic issues, the cardiorespiratory diseases that are occurring amongst these youth, and cyber sickness. But apart from that, something which was very important was the health problems, not only, but the mental disorders. That is something where there is precipitating loneliness which they have focused on, and which is actually becoming something inaccessible for the parents to actually hold on to, because they do not understand what they actually study, what they actually read, and what they actually do, because they have started finding time for themselves in their rooms. And my findings will say so. Before I talk about my findings, one more thing that I will say in the study that I've made, in the studies of Bonduras social learning, where I've said that modeling is something that is observation and modeling, where I mean about the role model. So once we go to school or colleges, we actually have someone to look up to. Now, when we do not have someone in real in front of us, then what happens is we start modeling someone who is actually on screen available. So obviously, whatever the person is teaching us, whatever interaction that is happening with the person I am interacting with in my closed room is something which is making my virtual world so real. So that is it. And my findings would say that certainly Zoom fatigue was noticed, and initially when the pandemic started, the parents and the children, they were enjoying the kind of digital platform, and they were actually enjoying the kind of online work and studies. But later on, the parents felt that it is a kind of an interference in their personal life, being available 24 hours of the day. So they started restricting their work timings at home, even online. But they said, in 70% of my respondents said that they could not restrict that with their children. With some excuse or the other, they prefer closed rooms, secret, private time, where they feel that it is better to be there within their virtual world. Now these digital interactions started happening, and it gets so engrossed that parents complain. 80% of my respondents said that they are in a situation where they cannot make their children actually participate socially. Even with the family members, they are quite ignorant about what is happening in the family, because they do not participate in the family functions. It's functions in the sense like interactions when people are at home all together. In 90% of the cases, my respondents said that they are not aware of the recentmost apps that the children are using, and they are incapable of using, which I've already mentioned that there is lower tech readiness amongst the parents also, which is kind of an hindrance in actually being in contact with children. That is why the distance is actually being created. 40% of cases I have found that parents who have had their job lost during this time, and also people who are paid lesser or paid late every month, were unable to recharge their mobile phones on time every day. So automatically I found out that they said that the children were behaving rudely, they were being out of the track, misbehaving, being depressed. So it was such an important problem to them. 100% of the respondents said that certainly physical fitness was at stake for all their children. Finally, I would say that it is an increasing propensity of escapism amongst the children, which is extremely important, because the time when the personality development actually takes place in case of these children, they are actually missing out in learning the social mannerisms, the way they should be behaving, and actually what the life has to offer us. They are actually being ignorant about what is happening around them. So they are, with the advanced visual effects and the auditory effects, whatever is around them in their virtual world, they have started considering that to be real. So the violent videos and the videos which are sexually explicit and aggressive, it is making them more aggressive and delinquent. Competitiveness that is being created through the video games or these implicit sexual videos, they manifest in the form of desensitization to violence. It seems like violence is already normal because you have to win in the video game. So empathy is something which starts missing in these growing children. And most importantly, this escapism is something like if a mother is scolding the child for being online all the day, he feels or she feels that talking to strangers is a kind of an escape to this problem. And so they are getting into chatting with unknown people, strangers, and which is creating several problems which even the parents cannot have an idea about. Because with whom you're talking, how you're talking, that kind of a problem which the parents are unaware of. And
over 12 minutes.
Sex is something which is actually overarching our culture, and it is very important that we have this adult supervision app in the Google, and the parents need to upgrade themselves to know about the children, to actually have a supervision on their children. And these kinds of videos that are being made and so easy reels that are there, this is making them believe on the promiscuity as if it is very normal. So it is very important that we have a parent-children relationship, more of interaction between them, and the untimely and unwanted pregnancies and sexual diseases are becoming a reason behind this mainstream cinemas, which actually are covering such stuff these days, and students believing in sex-only relationship or nightstands, So the values and mutual respect for the opposite gender is something which needs to be inculcated from the very childhood, which is an additional task amongst the parents today.
Thank you, Joyita. Our next speaker is Akhi Shorbatutari. She'll be speaking on the struggle and sustenance of a dying profession, the Bishtiwalas of Kolkata during the pandemic. Please introduce yourself, Aki.
Hello, yeah. My name is Aki Sharwadikari, and the title of my paper is The Struggle and Sustenance of a Dying Profession, the Bhisthiwalas of Kolkata During the Pandemic. Sorry, I forgot to wish you all good afternoon, Madam Chairperson and members of the audience.
Where you have come from, your affiliation?
I'm from Calgary University. Yeah. If one still spots a man with a bucket or an aluminium container or a plastic container full of water, balancing it well on his shoulders, walking swiftly across the streets of Park Circus area or parts of North Calcutta like Shambajar or Central Avenue, then you are sure to have met the traditional water carrier of Kolkata, or who is colloquially known as the Bhistiwala or the Bahari. These are the people who who collect water from the nearest corporation taps, and they supply water to offices, old apartment houses, tea stalls, wayside tea stalls and factories. And it is really surprising to see that in an era of digital India, e-governance and or smart city, or where the government is trying to envision a smart city paradigm for the entire country, the Bhistiwalas are still indispensable when it comes to the supply of such an important commodity like water. So my paper is it is a miniature ethnographic study of which involves observation and interview, and it basically tries to focus on how the Bhistiwalas, specifically in my neighborhood, have been able to negotiate the changing cultural landscape of an urban center during the pandemic, which has crushed lives, taken away jobs, and most importantly, pushed the people onto the brink of existential crisis. So, if we come to the history of the Bhistiwalas, then the word Bhisti has come from the Persian word bihisht, which means paradise. And the Bhistis were basically a group of, they were like a group of Muslim men who came from Arabia, and they followed the path of Mughal aggression into India. And initially they supplied water in villages without any charge, but with changing times, their occupation has now become monetized. And most importantly, when I asked some of the Bhistiwalas in my neighborhood if Muslims still are engaged in the work or not, they said that there are no Muslims in the work anymore. So this is something, this occupation at present has been taken over largely by the Hindu people who are coming from the rural hinterlands of Bengal, and so this shows a significant shift in the demography of the occupation. And interestingly, these are people with dual occupations, such that they work. I mean, those in my neighborhood specifically, they have a dual occupation to sustain themselves. So they work 1 month in the villages as seasonal farmers, and the other in the city as water carriers. Bimal Shah, who was one of the Bhistiwalas of my neighborhood, who still is, sorry, I learned from him that during the peak of the pandemic in 2020, some of their co-workers in other neighborhoods had tried to go back to their homes in the villages, illegally of course, by cycling their way through. And this is something that shows their helplessness and their inability to sustain themselves when everything is shut down, and staying indoors is the so-called norm. So they were thwarted with severe police crackdown at that point of time. And this gets me wondering what the daily nature of negotiation between the Bhistiwala and the political at the ruling party, the ruling class dispensation, such as the political party leaders and the police, comes to? Like, what is the daily nature of negotiation between the Bhistiwala and the ruling dispensation? Because following Partho Chatterjee's distinction between civil and political society, owing to the exception that these Bhistiwalas had posed during the then prevailing norms of not going out of the house during the lockdown, what part of political society would they constitute? Moreover, as democracy tries to manufacture consent by gaining the votes of the governed, the question of co-opting them by the urban leaders does not arise because they do not vote in the cities, but they vote back in their home districts. So the answers to such questions remain quite ambiguous. Okay, as reported, their landlords had exempted them from paying rent for the first 3 months, so that came as a boon for them. They did not have to pay rent. And during this period, they also received support from their clients and the state government, who helped them with rice, oil, salt, sugar, and other inexpensive necessities. Further, with limited availability of emergency services, they were also able to make certain trips to old apartment houses where they generally supply water, as I've already mentioned. And they used to basically stand outside the grill gates, the collapsible grill gates of various houses, and the owners of the apartments would extend their own buckets and they would quickly pour down the water. These episodes continued for a year and a half till things started to normalize according to them. And these people have also been complaining of how the money that they would send back to their villages has reduced. Previously, they would send around 7,500 to their villages, but now it has come down to 6,000. And because of the rise in prices of rice, cooking gas, and other kinds of necessities, evidently their real income has reduced, and the fact that they earn only around 300 to 350 rupees a day, a pandemic makes it even more difficult to make both ends meet. And most importantly, having been stuck at home for the entire of 2020 and a greater part of 2021, I consider myself extremely fortunate to have chanced upon them. That is only those who have been living in my neighborhood. Since they were entrapped according to me, they were entrapped in a space-time where staying indoors was the norm, and I could feel a deep sense of convergence with them, as I too was cut off from my university, attending online classes and constantly forced to interact on virtual platforms. So this is where I felt that there is a plane in which I can connect with these people. I would like to conclude saying that the existence of a unique occupational group at the center of an industrialized and urbanized megacity blurs the rural-urban divide. It is true that tomorrow or day after, their occupation will become a subject of archival historiography, because two of the Bhistiwalas in my neighborhood, upon asking what the future of their occupation is, and especially after being subjected to the harshness of the pandemic, where they see their occupation in like a decade or many years down the line, they said that they actually did not have any future and it was a dying profession. But the fact that certain houses or certain urban centers still prefer the meetha pani, or the water that has been brought by the Bhistiwalas, over the tank water or the piped water facilities or the plumbing system, it indicates their residual relevance. And they said that they want to educate their children. They do not want them to face a future that is as fraught with uncertainty as their own. And yeah, that's all. And however, their very existence and functioning is a subject of cultural inquiry that strikes a familiar chord in all of us. Thank you.
Thank you so much for this interesting topic. So can we take a little break, and I'm opening the floor for questions for the presenters. If you have any questions, There have been 1, 2, 3, 4 presentations. So, if you have any questions, yes, please. You need the mic. You can come here. Please come here. You're invited. Please come. Please introduce yourself and ask the question.
Hello. Hi, my name is Adufa. I teach here at Srinavedita as a visiting faculty. My question is to Someli and Tiasha. My question is that you mentioned that online elections that you face at JU, there's a problem because you don't know the real leader when the leader is, present virtually. So the question is, how do you define the real? Because you mentioned Goffman. So as Goffman says that we all put up a sort of a mask and there's impression management. So if there is impression management even in the real world, the very real that we're talking about, so what is this real for you? Like the real in real and the real in virtual, reality. Thank you.
Yeah. Any more question? Yes.
One-line question, please. No comment.
Hello, I am Meghjit Sengupta. I usually can't stand right now. I'm an MPhil scholar at Jadavpur University. I have a question for the first speaker who was representing Jawaharlal. Why do you think that prostitution is filthy? As you said, that it seems filthy and you want to bring them up from that position. So is there an integrally moralistic approach to prostitution for your NGO? And the second question goes to the third person who was talking about celibacy and not sex education. She was trying to talk about a moralistic notion of celibacy. I forgot her name. I'm very sorry.
Joyita Basu.
Yeah, you were talking about promoting celibacy. So can you talk more about it? Can there be sex education rather than celibacy for people, for youths who are deemed to or assumed to go into looking porn? Yeah. So that's my question.
Any more question? Yes.
Question, please.
We can
One line.
gather only one.
So my question is to the joint set of presenters. You spoke, I'm trying to make it as short as possible. So you spoke of a political institution that is apolitical, and you kind of compared it with the open and the transparent atmosphere that you get in Jadavpur University. So my question is, on what basis are you calling an institution apolitical, given that they have access to claim of resources, they have claim to access of resources, and given the fact that any institution cannot just be called apolitical on the basis of whether they have a union or not. So that's all.
I think I will request, give me the microphone. I will request
Those who are asking questions, narrow down your question poignantly, sharply in one sentence. Don't explain the concepts. That is not your duty. You are asking the question. Please make the question a question, not a comment. And the answer will be very precise from the people questions have been sought for. Very answer.
We cannot take in any more questions, so because we do not have sufficient time. So please, Tiasha and Someli, you both have 2 questions, so will you answer them first?
Yes,
and
ma'am.
then we'll go to Joyita Basu and Devlina.
Yes, ma'am. So, my answer to the first question is yes, virtual. The
fact with virtual is, and the difference between virtual and physical is, in physical I can actually see the person, his mannerisms, their mannerisms, and what they are doing in daily basis in the campus. But when it becomes a virtual election, we do not know if the person is correct or not, because we do not know the entire student body of the university. We do not know everyone. We need to see them. We need to go to the campus. So the difference between online election and physical election is this. Yes, thank you so much.
I think next to Joel, the question was microphone to the
Ask.
one answer.
Hello. So the question was why I was mentioning filthy or something like that. A filthy comment was there. The very word filthy comes from the community only, because if we ever go to Bobazar area or Shonagachi area and see the sizes of the houses, it's not a house. It's the environment, the way they are staying, they are living. It's not the movie Gangubai Katwara. Sorry. We are not living in a Bollywood world. If we really go to the field, really stay with them at least one day, just feel how they are living, their lifestyle. There is no toilet, there is no sanitation. The condom is not provided to them by the government, though there is a ongoing brothels over there. The government know it very well. The police take bribe from them so that the traffic girls get away safely. When we go to rescue the girls, the police already give them information and the girl has been trafficked to elsewhere.
So, Devina
sorry.
was mentioning filthy
Yes.
in terms of the environment in which they live.
Absolutely.
And not in terms of, she did not have any moralistic tone to the profession. Okay,
Absolutely.
It's because you should see where they live. It's pretty sad.
Devina meant that the environment was dirty, filthy. She didn't mean that. But I will ask one question, which you can answer me later on. Why there is no training for the sex workers? We have degrees for everything now. Why there is no training for sex workers? What movement has been done? Nothing. And sex workers interviewed, they say they do not want their daughter to go into this profession.
Yes.
Sex workers themselves are very moralists from that point of view. They have never said that we want to be trained in sex work. Why not? You can give the answer later on, because there is no time. And just saying academic vocabulary of moralism, we can't get away with it. And to begin with, moralism may not be that bad. Sometimes it's need to be moralist, like the leaders of India who loots people's money. That's a position I will take as a moralist. Thank you. You can give me the answer later on. Don't worry, I'm not like
There can be debates because the condition where they live is really pretty bad. In filthy water use na korleo, the toilets do not have a door, and যেখানে ওরা জল তোলে সেটাও আমি গিয়ে দেখেছি. It is so bad, so bad. I think she meant that only. And the next one and the next question, Meghjit, was also to Devlina. There was
I have
another
only one
question.
There was
question.
Atuva. Atuva was there at first question. Well, asking question, please introduce. Otherwise, how can you be addressed later on?
I'm Joyita Basu. I was making the presentation as you have asked me the question. Thank you for it. But first and foremost, I would clarify that I did not talk about celibacy at all. I was talking about the sex related videos which the young students are seeing untrained, unmonitored, what they are seeing, how they are seeing, because it is certain that sexual desires and the need for watching all that is true, but that has to come in the right time and in the right place. And with supervision, that's why I have talked about the parent-children relationship as well. That is, they should be talking to each other to get themselves clarified and not do things which will lead to mental disorders later on. Thank you.
You missed a real point. The point is that the parents have to be trained first. In terms of
Ma'am, I
not
mentioned
watching pornography when they watch and deprive their children. You're missing the real point. No, that is the real point.
But when I mentioned that these things should be under supervision.
What supervision? How do you give supervision to the parents who watch pornography? See, you know the world statistics. From 40 to 59, Indian middle class men watch highest pornography in the world. This is 2021 statistics. So who supervises them? You're asking supervision of children? That's a wrong starting point. Ask for the supervision of the parents who do that. That's the right starting point.
Okay, let us move on to the presentations. Next presenter is Shreyoshi Shen. She'll be speaking on battling the pandemic, impact and ramifications of COVID-19 with regard to school-going students in Kalimpong district, West Bengal. You have 10 minutes, Shreyoshi.
Good afternoon, everyone, my respected teachers and my fellow participants. I'm a PhD scholar from Jadavpur University, Department of Sociology. The title of my paper is entitled Battling the Pandemic, Impact and Ramifications of COVID-19 with regard to the female school-going students in Kalimpong district, West Bengal. So Kalimpong as a district has witnessed some of the major challenges in the domain of school education and learning opportunities of the female student that actually widens the existing achievement gap. But on the other hand, and this is a term that I have used in my research paper, that on the other hand, the students have adopted an approach known as the classroom to community approach with its associated efforts mediated through the agency of these female students and educators to address the issue of unfinished learning. It is important to understand the role of gender in influencing this discourse on online education with specific reference to Kalimpong. Now, if you want to understand the geographical limitations of the district, let us look at the spatial topography of the district, where the district is primarily divided into 3 zones: the intensive circle, the general circle, and the Gorubathan circle. With Gorubathan circle, in Gorubathan circle, the 70% of the circle falls under the shadow zone with poor network connectivity. Now, I have done case studies with specific reference to 2 renowned schools in Kalimpong, the St. Philomena Girls Higher Secondary School and the Kalimpong Girls Higher Secondary School. The methodology includes 15 oral narratives and case studies of 15 students who have been exposed to online education, 7 teachers who are teaching in the schools, and also the different stakeholders in the education sector, mainly the government officials like the district education officer, the district child protection officer, and others. The main objective of my study is basically to analyze the mediation of gender role and its impact on the emotional and the mental well-being of the students, and the whole idea of the gendered nature of learning. This paper also attempts to examine the correlation between cases of school dropouts and with particular reference to Kalimpong, an alarming rise in teenage pregnancies and elopement and underage marriage and sexual abuse of girls that adversely affected their learning outcomes. This study will shortly delve into the initiatives taken by the schools post-pandemic, like safe space in schools, and also the initiatives like a qualitative assessment of the initiatives taken by the state administration, like Para Shiksha program, waiving of school tuition fees. And lastly, the paper that I will mostly be focusing on is, so on one hand, this paper tries to establish a dual standpoint, where on one hand, we see the disadvantages related to loss of social, emotional learning, lack of physical spaces for the students for their expression and creativity. But on the other hand, I argue that these female students have also, through their agency, they are trying to develop new methods to cope with the newly implemented online education system, and how they are actively constructing their social world in this new social setting. Now, The COVID-19 pandemic has not only created disruptions in the instructional time of the students, but also the educators, the teachers, they struggle with different issues related to inadequate provision for teacher capacity building, lack of differentiated model of instruction. That is something that it's an observation while I was, I was observing some of the classes of when the teachers were taking post-pandemic, and lack of subject-specific teaching aids, lack of an ordered evaluation system. So there's a difference between a formative and a summative evaluation. So most of these schools were practicing a summative evaluation, but a formative evaluation is a type of evaluation an evaluation system which happens throughout the year, which helps to analyze the strength and the weaknesses of the students throughout the year. There was lack of feedback from the students because it was more of a remote teaching rather than dialogic teaching. There was difficulty in teaching the application-based subjects. Now, if I look at the challenges from the female students, and later if I try to understand the challenges, a key trend that surfaced throughout my study was the lack of proper digital infrastructure, differential availability, affordability, and access to smart devices. More than half of the children I interacted with had only one common smart device shared by all the members of the family. There was a homogeneous standard model of teaching that actually set the base for lack of need-based tools for diverse learners and a differentiated model of instruction. So because of pandemic, we have learners who are placed at different levels of learning, right? So a homogeneous model of teaching does not cater to their differential interest. The study also looks at the correlation between the presence of shadow zones and educational inequality. I quote one of my interviewees, Dipsana Rai of grade 11 St. Philomena Girls High Secondary School. My village Tungaon Basti in Gidabling often has no electricity for 3 to 4 days at a stretch, and it automatically takes a toll on my grades apart from the untimely apart from the untimely submission of my answer scripts. So we see that with the advent of online education, technology has become an indispensable learning aid integral to the lives of students. So here technology plays a very dual role. So on one hand, it serves to enhance the increasing inequality, but on the other hand, technology, the digital medium, serves as a space for exercising the autonomy of the students, for realizing new social possibilities, for generating new modes of knowledge production, and also enabling the students to engage in civic and community participation. Despite being constricted to these private spaces where the adults try to safeguard the notion of protected childhood. So it basically means how the students, despite being in an adult regulated space, they try to exercise their own autonomy, they try to take their own decisions. So due to the lack of formal learning environment, there were instances of students bearing the brunt of the flagship programs like the model activity task, where the students had to finish their assignments and physically submit these assignments to the school authorities. The online education also introduced an approach towards a cumulative nature of learning. Now, what is cumulative nature of learning? It means that when you miss out classes or you fall back on one day of learning, it leads to added work for the next day. Differential impact of learning was also observed in the schools related to the domain of application-based subjects and social science subjects. The no detention policies in the school further aggravated the learning gap in the curriculum. School is seen as a space for sustaining peer group relationships, but with the closure of schools, the avenue to express themselves freely is threatened, and it signaled a rupture in the channel of interaction and communication. It also initiated a process of self-paced learning and the lack of formative evaluation throughout the year. The structural problems of school closure could be attributed to cases of school children in Kalimpong dropping out and owing to the financial disparity. As per the Purnashree and District Adolescent Cell District Action Plan of Kalimpong, 18 students between the age 11 to 14 dropped out, and 11 of them were girls who cited problems related to family. I quote Siddhant Darnal, who is the district coordinator of the SAC-KP program, that a case study, he talks of a case study of a girl named Ashika Tama, who dropped out of the school and went to Delhi to work as a nanny, from where she would send home her earnings. As per the district action plan, the district also witnessed a sharp increase of female population who were anemic, from 53.7% to 60.1% due to the closure of schools, which impacted the regular intake of the iron folic supplements. So, closure of schools not only implied deprivation of education, but it also led to a prolonged period of discontinuation of food supply through the halted midday meal schemes. The adverse effect of pandemic was also felt among the girl students, with a spike in teenage pregnancies, 163 teenage pregnancies out of 1,862 registered pregnancies, and various cases of child elopement. There was also, So I would just like to point out the narrative of Ruth Mukhia, grade 11, St. Philomena Girls High Secondary School, and I quote her, "I took part in a local club activity using the hashtag Abolish the COVID-19 Stigma, which included other children, where I visited the COVID-19 affected families and collected data about their domestic needs." Another interview, Jimkit Lepcha, gave insights to her experience, and I quote her, "I took part in a marathon named Run for Recovery to spread awareness about the COVID-19 protocols." So these narratives basically delve into the idea of autonomy and agency as manifested in the ways the child becomes a part of different relationships and is able to navigate from them. I use this term classroom to community approach to give voice to the efforts of students who resort to the use of internet and social media to engage in learning beyond classroom. The district education officer of Kalimpong has lamented that the children resorted to new modes of recreational activities like snorkeling, mountaineering activities, and they were not confined to the idea of private sphere anymore. This question, the idea of private, seemed to be pushed back to the realm of family. The new areas of learning thus questioned the rigid pedagogical structures that either enable or constrain the children's agency. So thus, this new form of social interaction is described as coming together of various publics, while at the same time characterized by the erosion of the private. I hereby argue that the idea of agency of the student lies with the ability of the children to significantly control their own lives and resort to new modes of social relationship that redefine their experience. The children learned how to exercise autonomy in these new structures, and this act of autonomy is further dependent on the material structure like technology and the reproduction of social and cultural capital. Thank you.
Our next speaker is Mokan Roy. The title of the presentation is "The Knot of Forced Consent: Stories of Korea's young women who were married or during the COVID-19 pandemic."
A very good afternoon to all the dignitaries and participants present here. So the last presentation talks about the autonomy of the female students, and I will present a paper and shed light on the capability deprivations that the young girls of our villages of West Bengal have suffered. Being into the profession of teaching has always been my privilege, I would say, to teach and come closer to the lives and the realities of the young girls and the boys who live in the villages. It has helped me to look into the realities to the lives which are very different from the realities of the young people living in the cities and the towns. In this lecture presentation, I would shed light on how young girls aged between 18 to 22 years were married off during the pandemic, going against their will to marriage, but they consented. So the consent was there, but how the consent were taken. The result of this research is based on a short empirical survey carried over a month of period in villages in and around Haldia that included Barshundara, Shutahata, Chondipur, Chowdipa and Basudebpur. 8 girls were interviewed through face-to-face interview technique and unstructured interview schedule. The COVID-19 pandemic has significantly affected humanity both in terms of health and as well as on a larger socio-economic scale due to severe economic crisis and the social impact resulting from the loss of job, temporary or for a longer period of time, the decrease in income and the dramatic restriction of the free exercise of fundamental rights and duties. Last but not the least, the closure of the schools, colleges and universities had a significant negative impact on the country's educational process. In the works of Decron, Jacobi and Scoffiers done in 2002 and 1997 respectively, they have shown that how families in the developing countries, they adopt various coping strategies to situations like droughts, famine and extreme situations where besides the families, besides they cut short their assets and cutbacks in their consumption, the educational compensation of the girls and the preponement of the time of their marriages are highly affected, and they are important and they are used as important coping strategies for the family. I have connected this to my research and how that has affected or that have impacted the consent which came out as a forced consent for the girls, how that has happened in Haldia. I have seen through this paper. With this background, for the first objective of the paper was to look into the circumstantial stimuli that have triggered the decision of forced consent to the marriages. And the girl had to give their consent, then it was to happen earlier if the pandemic was not there. All the 8 girls whom I have interviewed have pointed out to the deteriorating economic situation of their families as the primary reason that triggered the idea of their girls getting married off earlier. In the case of 5 girls, the early members of the family were fathers who were employed in the contractual basis in the informal sectors of the factories of Haldia on a shift and demand basis. Countrywide lockdown, on-job COVID protocol, downturn of the economy as a whole led to a mass employment in the factories of Haldia. In 4 of these 5 families, the job loss of the fathers made the families suffer a lot in terms of money and food. 2 families had garment shops which was closed continuously for 5 months and leading to a tremendous money crunch in the family, of course. In one of the families, the only earning member, that is the father, died out of COVID. And in all these households, the decision of marriage was an indirect impact, of course, of the economic situation. Why indirect? Because the unemployment, ill health, poor food security situation shifted the girls' educational need to a secondary priority. The closure of the schools, colleges and universities and jobs limited and subsequently stopped the pandemic has exposed the girls and the women to serious risks in this region. Closure of the universities has generated additional household and family chores for the young girls, requiring physical work and long time allocated for it, shifting the place and role of education to a secondary one. Consequently, too little and too short time were allotted to them for their educational needs. It was found that that 6 girls said that their parents feared the increasing cases of the fade-away marriages during the pandemic and found marrying of these girls would be a better way to secure their future. 2 girls conveyed that pandemic was used as a shield to conduct a low-cost marriage. Thus, the marriage of these girls were somehow seen as all-round solution to cope with the situation that arose out of the pandemic. The second objective of the paper was to see how the idea of consent worked in such decisions about marriage. On the surface, the decision of marriage was seen as just and right because all the girls were above 18 and they gave their consent. So on the surface, it was just. But delving deeper into their realities reflected the realities of experience of force, compulsion, circumstantial socioeconomic pressure that forced them to agree to tie the knot. In all the cases, arranged marriage were prioritized. All the girls agreed that they wanted to continue their higher education at colleges and didn't want to marry that early. 3 girls said that they were badly beaten by their fathers and brothers when they did not agree to marry. 2 girls say that their parents tried to convince them about the lifetime security they would otherwise get after getting married in terms of money and food. 2 girls said that the job loss of their brother and the ill health of their father made the continuation of higher education tough for them because of the extra cost of online education. In these areas where the study has been conducted, the non-marriage of the girls over 18 years was rationed by the logic of the girls still studying. But the closure of the colleges was a pin to the coffin of their educational journey, and the families had to face tremendous social pressure from their relatives and neighbors for not marrying off their girls above 18 and not studying. Thus, consent for marriage was given, though it was mostly against their will. So there was consent, but there was no will. The third objective of the paper tries to see the impact of forced consent of marriages that they had. The direct impact of such marriages was the discontinuation of their education. 6 out of the 8 girls dropped from the college in between their semesters. 4 girls said that though the in-laws promised to continue their education after marriage, it was discontinued by them due to the high cost of online education and evaluation systems of the universities. Moreover, the money from the Kanyasri scheme that these girls used to get and which acted as an incentive for these girls and their families to continue their higher education turned non-viable after marriage. They won't get the money after marriage. 2 girls who were able to continue their education even after marriage lost hope for further education, and they had when they had entered the college. They claimed that their in-laws will not allow them to continue their education or look for work. Instances of domestic violences were witnessed among 2 girls. These forced marriages had life-altering consequences for these girls that included early pregnancy, wean-free childbearing, poor maternal health, difficult pregnancies and childbirth experiences, college dropouts, increased levels of intimate partner violence, loss of freedom to spend time with other family members or friends. Evidence in other social and economic domains was also witnessed, such as poverty, low autonomy and decision-making, or poor nutritional and maternal health. These forced consent marriages thus deprived them of their capabilities which they had. Thus, COVID-19 pandemic, which evolved as a humanitarian crisis in general, aggravated the risk of early marriage and forced consensual marriage among young girls and heightened their degrees of vulnerabilities. Thank you.
The last presentation of this technical session 1 is by Stuti Chakraborty, and the title of her presentation is The COVID-19 Pandemic, a Trial for the Young Hijras of India.
Good afternoon everyone. I'm Stuti Chakraborty and I'm currently teaching in Bhawanipur Education Society College. Also I'm a guest lecturer at Rabindra Bharati University. And first of all, I'd like to thank Bula Bhadru ma'am, Piyali Shur ma'am and the entire RC24 because this is sort of my first offline seminar after the pandemic. So I'm really thankful to all of you, and also that I would like to mention that as the seminar is about how we all kind of negotiated with the pandemic, I am pretty sure that all of us have survived till here in our own ways. We have struggled in our own ways, and my solidarity with to everyone who have or is still trying to deal with the trauma caused by the pandemic. To start with my presentation, I have worked on the Hijra community, the young Hijra community of India, and I have mostly worked on the secondary data. I have taken the help of the secondary data to study them and how they have negotiated, how they have tried to survive in this dire state that I have tried to see through my research. So, negotiation is always a strenuous process, and every individual of the society had their shares of struggle to pull through the disasters caused by the pandemic. And in any kind of adversities, there always remains a blind spot in the affairs of the people with sexual minority, as we all know. And it definitely has magnified during the COVID-19 pandemic outbreak. The intensity of the struggle, again, varies among the different sections of the minority groups depending on their socio-economic political position in the society. In this paper, as I have already mentioned, I will talk about the Hijra community who, according to the Supreme Court in 2014, in the Nalsa judgment, as we all know it as, fall under the category of third gender. So before I start talking about them, I would like to shortly introduce their identity. So briefly, to introduce their identity, they can be considered as the people, who can be called like this particular category of sexual orientation. They include transgenders who live in a community followed by a particular kinship system known as the Guru Chela system, and they become Hijra only when the Guru accepts them in their Gharana. Gharana is the colloquial term of the community, often through an initiation rite of removal of male genitalia. The ones who go through this process are known as the Nirvana, and the non-castrated Hijras are known as the Aquas. There is also one more category of the Hijras who are popularly known as the Kotes. They are basically the feminine men, and they do not always belong to the Gharanas under the supervision of a guru. They often are thrown away from their natural family, or stigmatized for their gender choice they have made in their early age, and they mostly belong from lower caste and very poor economic class or minority religion. Being a part of this community, the traditional occupations that they follow are often like receiving alms by blessings. Then the comparatively younger people, like the younger Hijras, they do beg in the traffic intersections, and which is also known as the Lalbatti Mangna. Then there is Londa dancing. Londa dancers are specifically the Kotis who go to the village areas and suburban areas, and they perform as women dancers to entertain the people, the villagers, and etc. These are mostly done by the Hijras who belong from lower caste or minority religion. So we know that there are three main professions like begging, then there is alms receiving, and also one more is there, the ritualized performances in the different ceremonies, for example wedding or childbirth ceremony and all of that. So there is a very interesting fact that I have found is that only the upper caste, the Hijras who belong from upper caste, they only can be allowed to perform in such ceremonies. So I went through a case study where there was a Hijra, who named herself as Sharmili. She became a Hijra, and she became a Chela under her guru, and she was very good with dancing and singing, but she belonged from the Valmiki community, who are basically sweepers. She belonged from a Dalit community, and as a result of that, her guru never allowed her to perform in the group, in the festivities. So that kind of stratification, that kind of favoritism also works there very interestingly in these areas as well. They often weaponize their bold attitude and shamelessness to resist the ordinary people from provoking them or to collect money, and hence they tread on the fear and anxiety people have about them to coerce conformity. But if you try to, understand that why these are the primary occupations that they have, that is because it is a result of the widespread discrimination among the young people, where they are always debarred from the educational opportunities, employment opportunities, and including them in the mainstream. They are always debarred from being included in the mainstream society. This has led to resorting to such practices and kept them secluded from the mainstream economy. During the pandemic time, we became familiar with many new terms like physical distancing, social distancing, quarantine, and all of that. But the word social distancing might have been a new word for us, but for these people, it was not very new to the Hijra community, because they have always been outcasted. The rest of the society has always kept a certain kind of social distance with them, right? So, but then on any normal time, it would not have been a big deal to the community. But during pandemic, as the virus tightened the grip each passing day, the gap between the Hijra community and the society widened further. The elected government was reluctant to see them as a vulnerable group and provide them social, economic, and medical support in all sections, which could be inclusive in nature. According to one case study done by one online news portal, Outlook India, Hijra came to Bihar in the month of January into 2020 to perform as a launder dancer, and after that they had a plan to stay back till March, but after the lockdown happened, they had to stay back in Bihar, and they had no idea that how they will go back and how they will survive during the time of lockdown. The pandemic, the strict regulation and all of that made the Hijras extremely vulnerable, as their living was earned on daily basis and subsisted on alms collection, begging, as I have already mentioned. And there is another example, another case study I'd like to mention about is that after the lockdown eased a little bit, there was one person named Sonam Nayak who belonged from Jaipur, and they had their Hijra community who used to go and perform to ceremonies. So after the lockdown eased a bit, they went to a family to perform in the ceremony, and the members of the family shamed them and kind of told them that how come you can come to such this kind of a public gathering in such a crucial time? You can be the reason of the increase in the infection. And she was saying that it is nothing unexpected, because these people, the Hijra community, they are always prone to be stigmatized. They are always prone to be, understood as something that can bring negative effect in our lives, because that is how we have perceived them all this while. So, and also they have said that, but they had to do something to come back to the normalcy, because there was no government aids that they were getting, and they did not have any bank accounts also. So in a study conducted on more than 60 transgenders or Hijras, they have found out that only 60% of them had bank accounts or post office accounts, and the remaining 40% said that they do not have proper documentations or identity proofs to open an account or to get the benefits. The reason behind this is one that I have felt is the individual Hijras' histories of internal migration mean that they no longer have links to the formal address associated with their government approved IDs, because they have come out from that and they have joined a new community, new Hijra community. And on the other hand, they often have to go through a very exploitative and problematic gender screening test mainly on district level, while acquiring the transgender identity card. Okay. So and there is like one more major issue, that is, although the transgender identity card and the protection rules and all of these things are there, but on district levels, on state and UT levels, very few people who are in administrations, they are either not aware of it, or they are not very tech savvy to access the portals and help the transgender people or the hijras in the local areas. So the trans activist Rajana said that the DMs don't often have the awareness, and they often have to run from one DM office to another DM office to get the help. And another important thing that she has said, that often these DM offices conclude that the applicants do not look like trans people, which I found is very problematic. And along with the employment and economic issue, there is also health difficulties that they have found, like that I have found out. Like there is one NGO who has studied. Yes. So basically, on the medical basis, what I have seen is that may it be before the decriminalization of 377 or after, or maybe the Nalsa judgment and all of that, none of that has have actually help these transgender people to secure their health facilities, because there has been news where a shopkeeper has been arrested for selling condoms to a trans person. There has been even though there are medical facilities for the hijras, but because of their disputed identity cards, they are often not being able to access it. It is often unattainable to them. And one very pathetic incident I would like to share is that they have their identity cards, right? But then, they wanted to claim a dead body of a trans person belonging from a hijra community, but they could not claim the dead body because according to the Indian law, if your father's name is not there, so basically, generally what happens to this hijra community is that in your identity card, your guru's name will be there in your father's or his husband's name. But in this case, it's somehow it's unrecognized by the Indian law, and that is why the body couldn't be given to the members of the who were acquainted to this person, dead person. And to end, I would obviously have to mention some positive things. So I would say that there has been initiatives taken by the state governments. For example, UP government, there has been a very recent news where they have said that they have this Kinder Kinder Kalyan board they have made, where they have promised to make separate hostel rooms, separate wards in hospitals and all of that. And again, only legislative changes and protective actions, they are not going to help it. They are not going to help this community or the hijra community until and unless we as individuals and as group of people don't become trans friendly in nature and more inclusive in nature. So that's it. Thank you. Thank you so much.
There is no time. Do we have time to take in questions? If we have only maybe 2 questions. For the last 3 presenters. I don't think we have, so we can start with the technical session.
Thank you, Professor Shur, for chairing the first technical session. And now we are moving on to the second technical session entitled Negotiating a Pandemic, Instances of Heuristic Possibilities. And for chairing this session, I would like to invite Professor Shubhashish Bandyopadhyay on dais. And in this second technical session, the first presenter is Yashvi Nadil. And the second presenter will be Shohini Shaha.
We are seriously running short of time, and basically we have barely 1 hour left for around 7 presenters, amongst the 8, including 1 absent presenters, whose audio video AV systems will be played here, not in the video but in the audio mode. So I slightly curtailed the tenure of each of the presentation to 8.5 minutes at the most. That means I will give a call at 7.5 minutes. We'll have one more minutes to wrap up. I ask you not to go for the anecdotal evidences. Don't go for the methodological elaborations. Rather go for the objectives, research questions, and then finals. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Yashvi Nadil and I am from Jadavpur University. Today, I'm going to talk about how Muslim women entrepreneurs were able to negotiate the pandemic through the use of social media. My topic is Negotiating the Pandemic, a study of Muslim women entrepreneurs in Kolkata, West Bengal. Traditionally, entrepreneurship has been considered a very masculine domain, and naturally it has excluded women from its territory. Even though more and more women have been taking to businesses, but the number of women that are still there remains minuscule. Only about 13.7% of the entrepreneurs in the country are women. Of course, the challenges that they face are multifarious in nature, and the challenges increase as one goes down the ladder of the social hierarchy. In the context of India, it is the Muslim women who constitute the periphery of the society, and they are at the margins of the economic sector. Very few nationwide surveys have been carried out, and mostly because the government agencies do not assess the role of social inequality, particularly related to religion, in one's access to livelihood, opportunities and services. One important survey that was carried out was by Hassan and Menon in 2004. It is known as the Muslim Women's Survey, where they tried to make a comparison between the socio-economic status of Muslim and Hindu women throughout the country. When the survey found out that all women across communities are faced with social, economic and political inequalities, it is the Muslim women who are more disabled than the Hindu women, even in the OBC categories. The Muslim women, like their male counterparts, were found to be concentrated in low-paying, home-based labor. They were found that Muslim women lie at the intersection of religion, gender, class, caste, and community. The pandemic, of course, increased the vulnerability of these women, and according to Cuts International, it deepened the cleavages that already exist in society. During the pandemic, the only relief that came was through the use of social media. And the aim of this paper is to assess the impact that the pandemic had on these Muslim women entrepreneurs. I tried to delineate the challenges that the Muslim women entrepreneurs face generally, the problems that were created by the pandemic, and how they have negotiated the pandemic in order to be able to thrive through the use of social media. The very first obstacle that these women faced was in terms of patriarchy. As already pointed out, entrepreneurship has been considered a domain that is dominated by men. And being members of a patriarchal society, women already face inequalities in education, they remain powerless and devoid of freedom. So these combined with the pandemic, these factors play an important role. Most of the women I interviewed, they explained how immensely difficult it was to get the support or even the moral support of their family members. There was a great deal of skepticism regarding their ability to succeed in their endeavors. They were hardly ever taken seriously by the family members. And even when these women bend the gender norms by just entering into these male-specific domains, they continue to be victims of gender bias. The businesses that they own remain small, not only in terms of the investment, number of employees, but also sales and profits. The repercussions of living in a patriarchal society are more starkly experienced when it comes to when these women try to procure funds for their business endeavors. The family members do not usually extend support, and when these women go out to take loans from formal institutions like banks, there is a great deal of paperwork, and we all know how difficult it is to get loans. Even when they do get loans, the wait for the credit is stretched, and the government schemes that are already in place, they have not yielded much benefits for them because of red tape, corruption, and misogyny, of course. So funds remain an important issue that these women face. The outbreak of the pandemic and the imposition of the lockdowns had unprecedented consequences for all sectors of the economy and all sections of society. The lives of these women entrepreneurs who were trying to sustain themselves were no different. It had great consequences for them, as many of these women had to close down their shops. Amina mentions, the market was not open, we had to pay the rent but had no income. Since my business was at its nascent stage, there wasn't enough money from the profit to share. Ultimately, I had to take the decision of giving up my dream. This is just one of the many women whom I interviewed, and as you all know, when the pandemic happened, a lot of the male members of the family, they lost their jobs. They were mainly daily wage earners, and not everyone had the luxury of working from home. So these women had to now participate and in trying to make ends meet. A new ray of hope, however, emerged in the midst of this dire situation that was created by pandemic. It was the use of social media. It wasn't a domain that women have not already tested. Of course, they had tried their hands on it, however, success was marginal previously. A respondent who started a business in 2017 elaborates, online payment was not famous back then. Cash on delivery was a standard payment mode, and many buyers would arbitrarily cancel orders. And apart from this, trust was an important issue. We all tend to not trust things that are being sold online. We are not sure of the quality, so these things were already there. So, but the COVID presented them with opportunities that were unknown to them before. Tajina, the businesswoman, is a very familiar name among Muslim women in the city today. It was formed in 2019 by a woman and has its membership restricted to female entrepreneurs and buyers only. It became a very important space for these women where they could interact, place their requirements, and have them attended by a host of women who were providing these services. When the stringent lockdown was relaxed and now market was still opening up, these women tried to reach out to their potential customers. Many of these women, those women who had their shops closed now but had stocks, they got an opportunity to sell them. Even for the newbies, they got immense support from the wholesalers, as they would provide them with, they gave them this opportunity that I will send you some pictures, but and you can buy it after some customers have told you that they want this product. So they did not really need the investment. They could just use their pocket money or whatever they had saved up before to do these purchases, and especially the sector that really benefited from this was those who were in the beauty industry, those who were the beauticians or those who were giving massage, as now they were able to provide home services. Many women have used this group to create a business for them. Many of them started out as resellers but now have shops or boutiques of their own. Many exhibitions, webinars at that time were carried out, which gave them an opportunity to showcase their products and which helped them to grow their business. Of course, there are some challenges like social stigma to people who by giving them training in particular courses. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Yashu. The next presenter is Ms. Shobhini Shahu. The paper is Embodied Interdependence, COVID-19 and the Shared World.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, everyone. I'm a PhD scholar from Department of Sociology, Jadavpur University, and I will be presenting on embodied interdependence, COVID-19 and the shared world. Now, my paper tries to understand COVID-19 through the notion of a shared world and embodied interdependence. So, as we know, the pandemic suggests that there is a disease that is spread across the world. But at the same time, the way we know the world is also paradoxically. The world is a shared world for us, but this shared world is also, as Judith Butler says, not equally shared by all. So as much as we are interdependent on one another, we are also having a relation of power between one another. So it is through this true understanding of shared wall on one another, one hand, and on the other hand, an unequal world, that we try to understand the pandemic. So firstly, I argue that our understanding of the pandemic maintained a separation between social and the natural. So COVID-19 as a viral disease has been reduced to the realm of biology, which the natural scientists or doctors dealt with through medicine and vaccination. And its social and political aspects, I argue, were only understood through social issues as an effect of the pandemic lockdowns, like migrant worker crisis or effects on mental health or unemployment and others. Thus, in socially understanding the pandemic, we resorted to the effects of the pandemic rather than the pandemic or COVID-19 in itself. So it is here that I wish to depart from such an argument to argue against the only natural or medical understanding of COVID, to understand COVID through an embodied understanding. I intend to rethink COVID as an illness and think through the notion of the body, embodiment, precarity of health and interdependence of people. COVID-19 as a disease becomes centered around the notion of infectiousness, where a person infected with COVID would spread to the other through breath or touch. Face masks and hand sanitizer therefore became a way to prevent the spread along with social or physical distancing. However, the very biological and bodily acts of breathing and touching, I argue, are also socially embodied and shared acts of living. We breathe others' breath and in turn give out our own for someone else to breathe that in. We thereby share our breaths with one another. Thus, we live by sharing our breath, and which also makes us intimately connected to one another through our embodied existence. Judith Butler thus emphasizes, interestingly, that shared vulnerability by pointing towards our reciprocity. She says that we share our breaths with others, we share the surfaces of the world with others, and that we cannot touch another without also becoming touched. In a similar manner, we also fail to grasp that when we get infected, we also become infectious at the same time. So while we share the world, sharing is often associated with positive connotations like sharing of food and resources, which is always positive. But here, when we talk about COVID and infection, infectiousness points to a sharing that is negative and which can jeopardize our health. How do we understand this shared living when we as individuals affect the ways others live or die? It is here the importance of social distancing or physical distancing comes in. If we understand the world as relational and interconnected, distancing seems to be a negative attribute that pushes people away. It is because when we think of relatedness in this world, we understand relatedness only through the coming together of people rather than of difference or distance. Thus, our understanding of bonding or connections necessarily acknowledges the coming together as connectedness and not as distance or separation. Yet, I argue relationality is not only about coming closer together, but also how we distance ourselves from the other in order to sustain others' lives. In doing so, we remain in relation to the other through the necessary distance or separation. COVID pandemic also did something similar. While the idea of social distancing was criticized and in turn the physical and temporary aspect of distancing was emphasized, what we failed to understand is, in relation to distancing was that the rules of pandemic changed how we understand relationality. Instead of connecting through coming together, we remained connected through safe distances. Distancing became increasingly a significant means of acknowledging our connections, our relations, and keeping others safe through the very relation of distance. Thus, as opposed to thinking about distancing as a negative attribute, I see distancing as significant means to remain in relation to the other, but through a necessary distance or separation. Secondly, I read the responses to the pandemic through a masculine understanding. I argue that since the pandemic exposed our vulnerability in a shared world, the response to such a vulnerability was expressed through a very masculine manner. So courage and resilience was seen as celebrated virtues during the pandemic. The government also actively participated in celebrating the doctors and medical community as COVID warriors. So a similar masculine trope was also used for the youth, who were seen as more immune and therefore more resilient to COVID. Immunity, I thereby argue, became a masculine notion that helped people deal with the fragility of bodies and life. The immunogenic understanding of COVID led to a presupposition of youth as a non-vulnerable group, without considering those who were vulnerable due to social, economic and medical factors. Now, I argue that youth is not a homogeneous category, but is cut through differences in terms of social, economic differences, inequalities as well as medical inequalities. In the same manner, senior citizens, comorbid patients, social and economic minorities became more of a vulnerable group whose lives were not considered valuable enough to be protected and sustained. As Judith Butler argues, the vulnerable are not deemed productive, they are not valued lives, and if they die, that is apparently acceptable since they are not imagined as productive workers but drains on the economy. The paper thereby argues that the emphasis on young people as a non-vulnerable group and thereby the valuable asset for continued productivity and economic growth was a political act rather than a biological one. Mortality is as much medical as much it is, we can understand it also as political. So for example, interestingly, the shared world is unequally distributed due to social and economic inequalities. So disease and deaths also becomes political. I also argue that alongside social and economic inequalities, there is also health inequality or health minority, I say. Like for example, people having unequal access to healthcare and also comorbid patients who are more susceptible to fatality. So in India, very interestingly, there is also this question that comes up that also Judith Butler raises that we have to ask this question: who dies early, whose death is preventable, and whose death matters? And in India, we also witness the same things. For example, comorbid patients, senior citizens, and other people with lower immunity were seen as more susceptible to sudden deaths. The comorbid patients' deaths were not only justified, but their deaths also became a tool to justify COVID mildness. This death in turn became political sphere to claim the mildness of COVID and justification for herd immunity. Similarly, there were people whose death couldn't be prevented. Being a COVID volunteer myself during the second wave, I witnessed a 3-year child dying because the person or the family did not have access to healthcare. Similarly, such failures points towards deaths which could be prevented but couldn't be prevented due to the unequal access to healthcare. Thirdly, the death of senior citizens, non-dominant caste and caste groups, unequal health benefits, and groups with unequal health benefits or comorbid patients. All these people were considered to be easily disposable. Therefore, we saw dead bodies piling up in crematorium roadsides and at the same time also in the rivers. So, thus I argue that the creation of this fit young population and the mildness of COVID on this group led to the recreation of Darwin's survival of the fittest theory, leading to the justified easy disposal of the vulnerable groups such as comorbid patients, minorities of caste, class, gender, who have limited or no access to proper health care and good health. Thus, at a time when wearing masks is shunned as unmasculine and cowardly, while masklessness is justified through individual freedom and liberty, how do we care for a shared and vulnerable world of embodied interdependence? I thereby conclude that in order to sustain a shared world, we need to recognize that we are interdependent upon one another, and that in order to survive, we also have to make the other survivable alongside us. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Kumar. Survival of the fittest was a strong point by Albert Spencer initially, not by Darwin. Thank you. The next speaker is Ms. Yakila Bhutia. And the paper is The Role of Baking in the Times of Pandemic, a social study among the youths of Kalimpong. Okay. The next one is Gunjuri Bhattacharya, the paper titled Impact of Online Food Industry on Youth During COVID-19. You have 8 minutes, after 7 minutes.
I have a request, please don't go more than 8 minutes. We cannot afford, we have to stop you.
Sure.
You stop yourself.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Gunjari Bhattacharya. I'm doing my MPhil from Jadavpur University in Sociology. My paper today is Impact of Online Food Industry on Youth During COVID-19 Pandemic. Now, in today's fast-living world, we all want ease and comfort. And what is comfortable than getting your favorite food within 30 minutes at your doorstep? So that has helped our online food industries. Now, the factors responsible for the growth is empowering demographics, low investment, increase in income and consumption, increase in smartphone usage, tech-savvy generations, and the advantages of the online food sectors are easy to use, flexible payments, time tracking. However, the disadvantages that is faced by online food sectors are increase in health risks, misplacement of orders without rectification, and security issues. Here in this paper, I am looking into 2 online food ordering services. They are Zomato and Swiggy. It is a qualitative research paper with descriptive analysis. The source of information is based on secondary data. When I was doing this paper, I kept in mind one objective. That is to look into the increased popularity of online food industry even during the pandemic. In the outbreak of COVID-19 pandemic, the world seemed to have faced devastating changes with increased cases of COVID-19 infections, lack of medical professionals, lack of medical infrastructure in comparison to one's country's population. And grocery and medicine facilities, drinking healthy water and healthy hygienic places to live became a luxury for us. Hence, the question that kept on lingering in my mind was that how did online food industry survive when the whole world, including India, was shielding themselves away from fast food, online ordering, due to the question of safety. Hence, in this presentation, I'm going to give you the overview of the strategies that was adopted by Zomato and Swiggy to combat the challenges that was faced by them. Now, during the pandemic, the online food industry, when it started, it came to a standstill, of course. But after the lockdown was after the partial lockdown came in, due to government of India's regulation, they could provide the service from 5 a.m. to 9 p.m. There was job terminations done by Swiggy and Zomato. According to the report May 2020, Swiggy laid off 1,100 employees, whereas Zomato laid off 520 to 540 employees, stating that their business is going down, high operational costs, and challenging work environment. Despite all this, they retained their popularity. And why? The factors are that Indian food delivery business model. The restaurants have to pay a lump sum amount of revenue to these online food sectors. The customers, we as customers have to pay delivery prices, the hike delivery prices. Then when we are placing an order, always we are nudged into ordering for starters or beverages. They are add-on with our expenses as well. The promotions, which varies from month to month, let's say the IPL, the Football League, then the Valentine's Week, all the discounts that are fooled by us. Now, in this pandemic, yes, the online food sectors had to deal with 2 impacts. One is after the partial lockdown went away, that is order volume went on fluctuating and the question of profitability. So looking at this situation, despite the challenges, online food industry is one of the few few businesses that has benefited during the years of pandemic. How? Because we were devoid of recreational activities and we were cramped into our houses, and what we did was open our phones and ordered food that we love. But a steady increase of the opportunities that online food industry gave us is that amid the pandemic, the option of what you want at your doorstep within 30 minutes can be delivered to you. But to be more available to the customers, Zomato and Swiggy launched their version of grocery and medicine getting at 10 minutes. They launched the cashless payment, the contactless delivery. They launched the options of fitness food, the option for the food for COVID-19 patients, and also the home-cooked food that basically attracted the youth, that basically attracted the people to more and more indulge into online food sectors. In this service providers, when we see about Zomato and Swiggy, we always talk about that the employees were sacked away. But also, because of the popularity, because of the demand of online food industry, there were opportunities for delivery executive. And more youth wanted to take up the delivery executives because there was less qualification needed, or should I say there were no qualification needed. And the delivery executive, when I talked to one of the delivery executives, they pointed out that their per day income is 1,000. Why? Because the rest of the income goes for petrol and other amenities that is not borne by the companies. And moreover, there are jobs for software controller and backup jobs is given in Swiggy and Zomato, but the delivery executive job opportunities is given more and more because they need someone to send things to your houses. Hence, I would like to end my presentation by saying that amid the challenges, the Swiggy and Zomato has kept on being relevant in the industry, and it has generated employment to the youth only as delivery executives. I started my presentation by stating that online food services has given us convenience and ease. But I would like to end my paper by saying that in the pandemic years, it has generated luxury and has given ease, not only food, but also grocery, medicines as well. Thank you.
The driving skill in a kind of lonely, pandemic-stricken urban center is a skill and is a qualification when the person's at a risk. The next paper presenter is Mr. Meghjit Sengupta, and his paper titled Queering the City During the Pandemic, a Sociological Inquiry into Young Urban Queer Subjects in the City of Kolkata.
Hello. So my name is Meghjit Sengupta. I'm doing my MPhil from Jadavpur University, Sociology Department, and my paper is titled Queering the City During the Pandemic, a Sociological Inquiry into Young Urban Subjects in the City of Kolkata. Right? So when we think of the idea of a home, we generally think of it as a safe space, as a space which provides us care, as a space where we can live, which is made habitable because of the presence of our natal family, and essentially because of the presence of our natal family. For a long time, sociologists have interrogated the notion of a home. Some have claimed that the notion of kinship, the notion of blood, is thicker than water at times, and sometimes they have claimed that adopted relationships, such as we have Kath Weston talking about families we choose, right? The families which we form in our everyday lives. For queer individuals, pandemic was a very interesting situation where they had already for a long time chosen families, where they had already for a long time made friendships beyond the space of their natal home, beyond the space of their kinship bound home, which was essentially, as queer theorists call it, essentially heteronormative, right? So where you have the father, the mother, and the child, and that entire plethora of relationships surrounding the father, mother, and the child, right? So queer theorizing has generally talked about non-heteronormative human subjects in the process of queering the home as moving away from heteronormative desires and imaginations of the home as a site of habitability, permanence, and intimacy, which is essentially between heterosexual couples and the entire plethora of intimate relations that are made available because of heteronormativity and heterosexuality, right? And this notion of queering intimacy has proven true through the narratives of several queer, non-binary, non-heterosexual people who have moved away from their families. And my research generally has looked at people who had left the city and came back, and people who used to think of a space of a home beyond the natal family, right? What pandemic essentially did was simply bring them back in, right? And it was also expressed through metaphorical notions of going back inside the closet, right? Going back into acting and playing straight inside the families, and it also literally invisibilized an entire plethora, a myriad of performances which were making me feel comfortable in, beyond the space of a home, in the space which I have learned, I have been, practicing to call as my home, between my lovers, between my friends, etc., right? So I have made 6 points because I have less time. So the second point would then talk about the everydayness of queer love, which is then captured, which is then tamed within the natal family because of the pandemic. But we do have, queer men who have literally interrogated that entire process of being captured, and they have used the help of dating apps such as Grindr to locate who are the nearest gay people around us, and they have, pretty alarmingly hooked up even during the pandemic, right? And there were scores of Grindr bios changing to, pandemic sex, and then, stay home, but let's have video sex, and also threatening lives in breaking rules. But these entire concepts were basically breaking barriers, breaking territories of what we imagine of as home. So during the pandemic, we were supposed to stay inside the home, but these apps were helping us, or helping a lot of queer people that I know, break the barriers of home, right? Now, inside the natal home, we go back into the closet, we go back inside the house from working spaces beyond the city, for instance. So when we came back, a lot of queer men especially, they said that, a very interesting thing happened during the pandemic. The cost of marriage was lessened a lot, right? So when the cost of marriage came down, it was more of a pressure to gay men especially, and lesbian women, to get married, right? And a lot of these people who were like 28 to 30 years old and had a job beyond the city, they had to come back, and they were forced into, either get married or, and some of my, for instance, I just talk of one strategy. So one person, for instance, just went on to the extent of calling every single girl up. So he's a man, he's a gay man. He called every single girl up and said that, I'm a celibate, or, I'm important, etc., etc. So these were strategies which were used by queer people, queer men, who, who had to pass through the entire pandemic zone, right? However, there is a rising awareness after 2018,
decriminalization. And some changes have taken place. You know, young people have dared to come out, they have been accepted inside their home, and for them, you know, and as I know some of my friends, my co-subjects who have been accepted within the household. And you know, I would just, you know, end probably, do I have time? How much time do I have? 2 minutes? Okay, so I would come to a, you know, sort of a conclusion, and I would keep out my own narrative because that's the best kind of narrative a queer sociologist can give. You know, March 2020, the day the government declared lockdown, I was returning from college actually. So I was returning from College Street, I was returning from Coffee House. So we had college on that day. I'm from Presidency University. I did my master's in Presidency. So we had college that day. I actually, you know, went out with all my friends and I was returning back. And for that very moment, I felt that, you know, oh my God, for 30 days I have to like not be home. I had just got to know Presidency. I had just got to know the campus. And you know, the campus becomes so important as a space of not just acceptance, but also tolerance, but also respect, but also understanding, right? And that very moment I had lost all of it. And I had not just lost all of it for 30 days, but it went on. It went on for that entire year. And I had lost every single hope of going out of my house, of going out of my home, of connecting with people who understood me, of connecting with people who respect me and, you know, give me whatever love that I deserve, right? And you know, it's not always about visceral love. It is not always about, you know, touch. It's also about the fact that, you know, there is a person who is there, with whom I can simply sit face to face and talk. You know, there were a rise in virtual, you know, friendship meetups, etc., etc. But what it also does, you know, as queer sociologists, one can not just, you know, talk about how access to love, loved ones, sexual touch was just absent, but also while doing everyday life within a pandemic-stricken household, which demanded heteronormative behavior and conformity, one kept encountering grief and death that one could hardly deal with, especially in the heteronormative space, especially in a space where you're not allowed to be yourself. There were many narratives. For instance, one of my transgender friends who said that, you know, I had to hide my wig. I didn't know where to hide my wig. I didn't know where to hide my makeup kit, but I had to. I could not just come out to my parents, because if I did, I would be thrown out of my house. And there are, you know, narratives where, you know, I personally know a lesbian couple who were thrown out during the pandemic. They had nowhere to go. You know, thankfully Sappho helped them. But you know, these are the narratives which are coming up from queer young people who had to deal with the pandemic. They have already, you know, queerness as something beyond, you know, beyond young people. Queerness as a concept has already gone through one pandemic, the AIDS pandemic, right? And they had to again face another pandemic which caused equal grief and death. Thank you.
The next one is Mr. Wangdil Dama. Darjeeling is during COVID-19.
Good afternoon, everyone. And first of all, thank you to SNU and RC for giving me this opportunity. I'm Wangdil Lama, and I'm right now doing my master's in sociology in University of Calcutta. But in March 2020, I was a UG student at St. Xavier's, Calcutta. And I don't know how many of you are familiar, but there is just behind the back gate of St. Xavier's, there's Camac Street and there is Medipoint. And then all the youths, because we are talking about the youths, go to Camac Street to, you know, drink tea and smoke a cigarette. But then in March, one day, I chose to visit a medical store just beside Camac Medipoint. You know, and there I realized that the prices of the mask has been going up lately, but people who are walking at Park Street are wearing masks. Next day I came to Salt Lake, and here too I saw that people were wearing masks. And then the day after, I just returned to Darjeeling, and that's when I went to Howrah and saw that none of the people were wearing masks out there. So, you see, there is a great division, within the Calcutta here itself. And then I went back home. I just carried 2 t-shirts and a laptop while going home, thinking that I'll be there just for a week. But then I was wrong. It took about 2 years. I graduated online, and right now I'm here at Calcutta University. And I also did my first semester of my master's online, and finally now the offline classes have begun. And today I'll be presenting a paper titled Darjeeling Gaze During COVID. So let me begin by clarifying the term Darjeeling Gaze. This term is a new term that the youths of Darjeeling have been using in Instagram and Facebook, to tell that yes, we belong to Darjeeling, and this is the new term that we have created. And now, I think everyone here knows about Darjeeling, right? But as a place, you all know. But how much do you actually know about the people out there? Some of you may be visiting Darjeeling during this Durga Puja as well. But what about the people out there? How are they? So, people at Darjeeling is not just one. There are multiple tribal communities, different ethnic communities living there. They have their own separate attire. They have their own set of rites, rituals, festivals, special food and drinks, and also have their own language. But then what the outsiders know is that there's only one language, Nepali language, but that isn't the case. But then people out there have been, clubbed under a big umbrella term, the Nepali people. So now, these people have also been viewed as Gorkhas, and at times they are, demanding for a separate state. Now, why a separate state? If one is to ask this question to a youth like me, who is, oriented to sociology, I may talk about, the safeguarding, the language, the culture, and so on and so forth. But most of the youths who are there aren't, they don't care much about the subject as well. They only care about themselves and securing their own future, getting a job, getting admission in college. So they're only concerned about themselves. So they'll talk about having job opportunities, scope. And so in this research, I've tried to focus on the multiple aspects of the youth of Darjeeling. In order to come up with this paper, a questionnaire having lots of open-ended questions was circulated online through Instagram and Facebook. Also sitting at various popular hangout spots of people of Darjeeling at South Calcutta and listening to their conversations contributed to some of my understandings. Coming to online questionnaire, 2 questions I would like to mention. Place where you are from. The answer, of course, Darjeeling. And place where you are currently based. So my respondents gave various answers to this question. Some were at Bolpur, Kolkata, Karnataka, Hyderabad, Bangalore, Delhi, Mumbai, Sikkim, and one of the respondents was also at Pokhara, Nepal. So why are these people far from home? So on asking what they are doing at these places, most of them were either UG or PG students, or some who had just completed their PG and are looking for a job in the metropolitan city itself. So this issue of migration is not something new. There are so many other issues of people of Darjeeling that have always existed. But then came the COVID. I remember Donald Trump saying the virus as Chinese virus, and then the Asian hate increased globally, and so did racism against people of Darjeeling and the Northeast people in the metropolitan city. However, the youths of Darjeeling tolerated it, at times wrote a status on Facebook or posted a small video talking about the discriminations that they faced in the metropolitan cities, and then they returned home. So now what happened at home? Home as in Darjeeling and home as in houses of the respondents. Let me quickly share a small anecdote about my own house. My mother still listens to the radio, and every evening at 6:50 p.m. she listens to Akashvani Kharsang, the local news channel. And then I used to overhear the person saying in Nepali that 2 people at Champana got tested positive, 1 person from Mamring village got tested positive. And then in the living room, my father, not caring about what my mother was doing outside in the kitchen, had his television on at full volume and watching Z News and Aaj Tak, and the news reader in Hindi talked about thousands of people getting affected in the metropolitan cities, beds not available, oxygen masks not available, loss of jobs and loss of lives. So you see, even if one is not affected by the virus, one is somehow affected by hearing all this and watching all this in the news channels. So now I tried to give this example to not only talk about my mother and father, but also other various people from older generations sitting at home and watching TV. But then now, since this seminar is about the youth, what did the youths do? And the youth is also not one. When we try to differentiate between the adults and the youth, then the youth becomes one. But the youths are also many. Like for instance, one of my respondents who was doing her first year GNM nursing came back home from Bangalore. But the third year girl who was also pursuing nursing did not get to come back home because she had to help out in the college hospital. So you see, within the youth also there are different experiences. So anyway, the ones that came back home, we had a presenter earlier talking about Kalimpong and the network issues as well. So let me quickly talk about online education. Was it effective? Now in a place like Darjeeling, just like Kalimpong, where if it rains slightly like it was today morning, the electricity will go off and then there'll be no charge on the phone, there'll be no network, nothing. So online education was a very big thing, and especially for students like me or anyone else who come here to study, and when we go back home, we're only 2 or 3 students in the class, and other students will be attending classes here in the city, but then we'll be there at night trying to contact our friend in WhatsApp saying, hey, what happened in the class today? So these cases were not, taken into consideration by the colleges here at the metropolitan cities. And however, I would like to conclude by saying that there were not just negative impacts of COVID, because the youths, they may have fallen asleep during the online class, but they were feeling very energetic when it came to opening Instagram pages, and creating their own thrift shop pages, or online digital art, or while doing digital marketing, or opening a YouTube channel, or taking part in an online guitar contest, or a photographic contest, and so on. People from Darjeeling also, the youths themselves, the college students also took part in making local achars. The college students now in their free time are making achars. There was an event called Gundri Bazaar, which gave a platform to all these people who wanted to sell their products. So, on asking the respondents what changes might come in the post-COVID era, they say that a lot of new startups are likely to come. Here I would like to mention that even the Prime Minister was talking about vocal for local and Atmanirbhar Bharat. But then, how vocal for local are we? Are we just going to use Patanjali or Reliance as a made in India thing? Or are we going to buy that achar from a village at Darjeeling, and say that, yeah, we are following this vocal for local thing? So, some people, may have got time to explore their hobbies and so on, may have learned something new, but then now that the COVID has ended, most of my respondents said that we'll probably go back to square one. And to where exactly is that? The issues that I began mentioning with when I started this, the same issues of racism, the same issues of migration and everything, we'll go back to that again now that the COVID has ended. Thank you.
Good evening, respected members and the audience. Today I am going to talk about the missing voice of youth with respect to children in conflict with law. Now, you may ask why I have mentioned the word children where the seminar is about youth. So here I am introducing my topic. The name of my topic is Incarcerated Youth and the Apathy of the State. And I have talked about how the voice of the late teenagers of 16 and 17-year-olds who are in paper considered as minor in legal terms, and they are constantly negotiating and renegotiating the Juvenile Justice Act of 2015, and in some cases also renegotiating the Juvenile Justice Act of 2000. And the later case, the later law underwent certain amendments, as a result of which it is known as the JJ Act of 2015. Now, in my presentation, I have considered the category of 16 to 18-year-old, below 18. This is because the category of youth is very fluid and dynamic. The lower limit and the upper limit has time and again in different continents have undergone different changes with respect to their age group and definition in terms of context, socio-political aspects. So here is I talk about the point of contention, because according to United Nations CRC 1989, the Convention on Child Rights, Article 1 states a child who is below 18 years is considered to be a minor, and Article 2 ensures that every child must be given proper treatment in terms of different axes of stratification by the different stakeholders of a particular country and a state, like we say Rashtra. So, and Article 37, Section B and Section D talks about that a child is entitled to legal assistance and cannot be, in brief I'm saying, cannot be unlawfully detained or arrested without following the due process of law. And where is the diversity in deciding the threshold of adolescence and youth age group? Now, for example, UNESCO and ILO defines youth ranging from 15 years till 24 years. And ILO is an important international stakeholder because there's a rampant problem of child labor and the section who are marginalized and are vilified, losing their own childhood and youth. So ILO is very important here. And the next comes the UNICEF and WHO divides this particular youth age group into adolescent age group, young people, and then youth, starting from 10, and it is divided in terms of 10 to 19 years, and then beyond 19 years till 24. And African Union considers it till the age of 35. And in the case of Indian government, they consider youth starting from the age of 25 till 29 years. And time and again we find policies catering to the youth population in their national youth policy, and the latest one is the 2021. Even in the 2014 national youth policy, the same age group was retained. And in this, the new one, there's a section where the government of India has devoted a section on social justice. The title of that particular section is Social Justice, where they have particularly talked about and acknowledged the fact that the youth population, especially the school students, the higher secondary students, have faced immense challenges during the COVID-19 because of huge dropout and the problem of lockdown, online classes, lack of access to the internet technology. So as a result of which, the government of India talked about that every school must ensure psychological help within their school premise. So this is the basic premise that I have given with respect to the youth population and the reason why I have chosen this 16-17-year-old. Now, talking about the juvenile delinquency. Now, I would like to give a brief overview of the JJ Act 2015 and certain problematic areas the questions I have tried to ask, I know there is no single solution. So I just wanted to pose this question, and I thought these questions will be worth pondering on. For example, the section 2, subsection 13, talks about child in conflict with law. And it is not qualified in technical terms of what, for example, is conflict with law, what is conflict or what is law in the true sense of the term, but is defined as an offense by any minor who hasn't completed the age of 18 years. And then section 5, for example, talks about that due process of law must be followed with respect to the accused adolescent youth. Now, this adolescent youth is my kind of coinage where I have hyphenated the word adolescent and youth, because adolescent is starting from the age of 10 and 12 at the time when people reach puberty. And since I have talked about the youth as well, and this particular section of 16-17-year-old falling within the low limit of the age group, youth age group, that's why I have hyphenated this term as adolescent youth. And yes, and in this section, now for example, the problem that I have thought of posing is that the situation of heinous crime, for example, is not defined, because in the new amendment of JJ Act 2015, there will be certain offences where a child above 16 years will be treated as adults and will be prosecuted under the normal courts. So this is one problematic area. For example, heinous crime is not defined. You will find those list of crimes in the NCRB data, but not in the JJ Act as a policy, as a law. So what were the parameters considered during the demarcation of the age group? And also the quantum of sentence of cognizable and non-cognizable offense is different for the same nature of crimes. For example, begging, or for soliciting trafficking, or for example, for physically mutilating or miming the child or the youth. So it's ranging from either 5 years or 10 years or 7 years. But why not same? Just like in 2015, when there was a discussion in the Rajya Sabha and Lok Sabha both, so MP Derek O'Brien asked that, who's the bigger devil? Why is it a differential treatment with respect to the crimes committed? Who are the motivators behind these crimes? Because in certain cases it is found that the ones who have motivated are the real adults, and the kingpin is someone else, but the child is being directed by the courts to be treated as adults and prosecuted. And so where is the thin line of distinction between the concept of retribution and reformation? That should be maintained for the juvenile. Now I'll talk briefly about certain, 1 minute, okay. So I'll talk about 1 or 2 cases. For example, how the Supreme Court, the High Courts and the different sessions court, the lower courts, and also the Juvenile Justice Board are constantly in disagreement. There is a dissonance among these stakeholders and bodies. Why? Because these particular cases are lingering for over a year. Why only a year? Sometimes of 10 years or 8 years. So when this accused youth were in their 16 years or bordering 16 years or 17 years are now well in their youth population of 24 and 27 within 30. So for example, in the Punjab and Haryana High Court case, the youth who was a 16-year-old youth who was involved in a post-poll violence, a panchayat poll violence, has been directed by the lower court, has been directed by the Punjab and Haryana High Court to the lower court to be treated as a juvenile, not as an adult. And in this case, there was a lapse and laxity on the part of the authorities, because a non-bailable warrant was issued against that particular youth, which is totally in contravention with the JJ Act. And again, an interesting thing is that in the case of radicalization of a youth who joined ISIS in 2019, was arrested, was charged by the Mumbai ATS anti-terror squad as an adult. And then Bombay High Court said, I quote Justice Serlikar of Bombay High Court saying that even if a child commits a heinous crime, he is automatically not to be tried as an adult. So what are the points of the case that I may put for retribution versus reformation, or upholding the provisions of the JG Act versus the question of national security. Now in other case where the accused... Alright. So this is how I concluded, and thank you.
We have left with just one more presentation which is not physical. The prospective speaker actually met an accident with a broken leg, so we have considered her presentation. I request Dr. Mujumdar to play the video. Audio.
Focusing on the vaccination procedures and
Vishika Ghosh, visualizing the pandemic.
Strictly aimed to disseminate information related to COVID-19. To focus on only those infographics which have been published by the official website of World Health Organization WHO, focusing on the vaccination procedures and are strictly aimed to disseminate information related to COVID-19. This paper might be taken as an attempt to join the dots between the facets of youth on one hand, pandemic on the other hand, and infographics on the other hand. For this particular research study, data has been collected from both primary and secondary sources. I have attempted to maintain the literary analysis of the secondary sources as exhaustive as possible. And my analysis in this paper is mostly qualitative in nature. Some of the chief objectives of my research study has been firstly, to explore the visualization of data in terms of health-based infographics, to seek out whether infographics shape the younger generation's critical thinking skills. Thirdly, my study attempts to join the dots between youth, pandemic, and infographics simultaneously. Lastly, my study elucidates how far infographics based on COVID-19 vaccination may lead to wide-ranging interpretations among the youth, which are dissimilar in nature. My chief area of research study is delimited to the informants belonging from the age group of mainly 18 years old to 24 years old. Coming back to the methodology section of my paper, the primary outcome was to evaluate the effect of each infographic upon participants' understanding of vaccines, along with their sentiments and variables. Secondary outcomes included their socio-demographic factors. Firstly, I started conducting the interviews as a collaborative interaction between me as a researcher and my respondents. Regarding the informed consent and the ethical consideration, I created a Google form whereby permission was sought from each and every one of my respondents before commencing with the interviews. I used to send them the Google forms beforehand, and I tried to keep them as informed as possible before acquiring their consent. Secondly, to attain their interpretations for eliciting information, I asked them to organize those infographics chronologically from the most informative to the less informative ones, and by citing a reason behind the chronological arrangement of the infographics. Further, I did compare and deduce which particular infographic was considered to be the most important for maximum number of times, and which particular infographic was considered to be the least important for the most maximum number of times. Fourthly, after conducting the interviews, I grouped those infographics or those visuals into three categories, namely risk factors, immunizing measures, and doubts regarding vaccination. The infographics which fall out for all the three categories, I listed them again under a separate category, which is the category of miscellaneous. The fifth step of my research study refers to a structured analysis, where I have considered how my informants are reacting to color scheme, size of the visual figures, size of the textuals, amount of content, etc. And finally, I have assembled all my findings and the oral narratives of my respondents into a readable, comprehensible write-up, including the data analysis and its interpretation. Research design. The research design of this paper is mostly qualitative in nature. The primary source of this study were the interviews of the respondents. The secondary source includes books, journals, articles, magazines, etc. The method incorporated for the purpose of my study is photo elicitation with the help of interviews as a tool of data collection. The study tried to elicit information and perspectives from the respondents through the usage of infographics. The infographics were conducted for mostly 15 to 20 minutes each. The sampling technique followed for this study was snowball sampling. My sample size for this study was small, it was 10. Firstly, studied furthermore and again concentrated only on those infographics which were published by the official website of World Health Organization and were based on vaccinations. Research instrument chosen for this paper is the interview schedule. Questions were read aloud by the researcher and answers were given by the respondents jotted down on the schedule. The nature of questions in the interview schedule were mostly open-ended in nature. For encouraging participation of the respondents, there were 20 questions for each respondent. I would like to talk about the most important section of my study, that is findings and discussions. Firstly, I have found out through this particular research study an overemphasis on fear factors through my respondents among my young respondents who belong from the generation of youth. While the mostly observed keywords in the infographics are found to be vaccination, immunization, COVID-19 side effects, etc., the mostly observed keywords mentioned in the interviews, in the telephonic interviews, are risk factors, sufferings, fever, pain, side effects, fear, etc. Hence, an overemphasis on the risk factors of COVID-19 vaccination has not only acted as one of the most important findings of my research study, but has also how the youth was observed to be very much afraid of the vaccination in spite of his immunizing measures. Secondly, the second finding of my research study was the reaction towards animated infographics was far better than the reaction towards the process infographics. Process infographics are those which explain a phenomena in stages. I realized that my infographics were engaging and interacting and were understanding the information conveyed by the animated infographics much better than that of the process infographics. They were able to decipher the content of these visuals and relate the same to their own personal experiences as well. As for the responses of my respondents, they have answered themselves that they were able to interpret the information much faster than the text-only guidance. Understanding of graphics was impressive among my respondents, but the sentiment was much more encouraging towards the fear factors of vaccination rather than the immunizing measures. And willingness to take vaccines was surprisingly found to be negligible among my respondents. The next important finding.
Thank you. She met with a kind of accident, broken her ankle possibly, and that's why we allowed her to have a certificate. That's why the token presentation of her study. Thank you very much.
5 minutes for questioning.
Yeah.
If we have any
If you have any questions, please
for 5 minutes.
come up with the questions.
We are
Let
already
me know.
5:12.
We have just 2-3 questions we can take at most. Please name the presenter who would like to question and make it one line in this session.
For the second session. Everybody is hungry now. Nobody wants to ask questions anymore.
So thank you very much. I could understand the scheme and the favor, the way people got involved and tried to make the things kind of really a novelty in terms of the research effort. I appreciate that. There are differences, heterogeneities in terms of the quality and the quantity. But the appreciated, at the same time, all of us, the teachers, appreciate the way students presented their cases with huge amount of imaginative sociological problems. Thank you very much.
This is the last.
2 minutes. It is the formal custom that we thank everybody. So I'd first thank the presenters, of course, those who came all the way from other parts of the city and still made it in an inclement weather day like this. So thank you, presenters, and Shubhashish Bandyopadhyay has already told that we all appreciated your efforts, and we would like that you extend your efforts furthermore. Second group of people we always thank, rather I always thank, is my students, who with all this patience have been sitting. Some of them are not sitting because they are the volunteers, others are sitting. So thank you for your patience, thank you for the support you have given us. A department cannot function without the support of students. And the third, who had to stay for some reason or other, and whom we actually made us stay. So I'd like to thank Professor Ashok Ranjan Thakur for this. And Professor Mollika Ghosh, she is a faculty in the Department of Humanities in English, and she has also stayed for this 3 hours boring long I don't know. It's a personal assessment, we don't go into that. And then last but not the least, I must thank the administration and the support of the mass comm department, that 3 hours they are actually taking our pictures. So I'll ask again to take group pictures, please, 2 or 3, and then you are released. And for the students, we have a small treat, so please don't go away that I have to call you again. I don't have that energy anymore to call you again. So please stay back, our students. And finally, those who have read the papers, like you're reading something, my humble suggestion is that don't read papers. Papers are presented, not read. Presentation means your organized thought by you, not reading at all. Reading actually put us in jeopardy because you had to give it more time. So never read in a conference. You will always see people who speak well, they don't read, they talk, they present. Thank you. And tea for Aam Janata, those who are Aam Janata, is left. There is tea, biscuit and chips. But those who are not, that means they are getting a treat also. They are also entitled to tea, biscuits and chips. Thank you very much.